They say every person has a price, but Eden Marlowe learned hers was exactly one sack of flour. On a scorching August day in 1884, her own father dragged her across the wooden floor of Tully's general store and offered to trade her like livestock. She was 18 years old, and in that moment she learned that to some people she was worth less than grain. But then a quiet rancher stepped through the doorway and changed everything, not by owning her, but by giving her the one thing she'd never had, a choice. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment below what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Eden's journey travels across the world. The August heat in Dry Hollow, Wyoming sat heavy as a wool blanket, thick enough to choke on. Inside Tully's general store, the air smelled of leather, tobacco, and the sour-sweet stench of whiskey that seemed to follow Caleb Marlowe wherever he staggered. Eden stood near the door, her thin dress dusty from the 3-mile walk into town, her hands clasped tight in front of her to stop them from shaking. She shouldn't have come. She'd known that the moment her father had grabbed her wrist that morning and hauled her out of their crumbling cabin. But her mother was sick, had been sick for weeks now, burning with fever, and too weak to even lift her head from the straw mattress. They needed medicine. They needed food. And Caleb Marlowe, drunk as always, had decided his daughter would be the currency he'd use to get them. "Stand up straight," he'd hissed at her as they'd walked the dusty road. "Try to look worth something for once in your miserable life." Now, inside the store, Eden kept her eyes down as her father swayed toward the counter where old Ephraim Tully stood, his weathered face creased with suspicion. Half a dozen townsfolk lingered among the shelves, Mrs. Hewitt examining bolts of fabric, the Miller brothers lounging near the pot-bellied stove, young Thomas Crane pretending to read seed catalogs while stealing glances at the unfolding scene. They all knew Caleb Marlowe. Everyone in Dry Hollow knew him, the worthless drunk who'd let his homestead fall to ruin, who spent every cent on rot-gut whiskey while his wife wasted away and his daughter wore dresses patched so many times they were more thread than fabric. "I need flour," Caleb announced, his words slurring together. "And medicine. Fever tonic, if you got it." Ephraim's jaw tightened. "You got money this time, Caleb? Because your credit ran dry 6 months ago." "I got better than money." Caleb turned and grabbed Eden's arm, yanking her forward so hard she stumbled. Her knees hit the worn floorboards with a painful crack. "I got her." The store went silent. Even the flies seemed to stop buzzing. Eden's face burned with humiliation as she knelt there, her father's fingers digging into her shoulder like talons. She could feel every eye in the room on her, could hear Mrs. Hewitt's sharp intake of breath, could sense the Miller brothers shifting uncomfortably. "Get up," someone whispered. She wasn't sure if it was meant for her or her father. "Caleb," Ephraim's voice was low, warning. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" "I'm making a trade." Caleb's laugh was wet and ugly. "Fair and square. One girl, 18 years old, strong enough, knows how to cook and clean, for one sack of flour and whatever medicine you can spare. Hell, I'm practically giving her away at that price." Eden closed her eyes. She wanted to disappear, wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. "Please," her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Please, Pa. Just let me go home. Mama needs me. She's burning up with fever, and—" "Your mama's the reason we're in this mess," Caleb snarled, shaking her so hard her teeth rattled. "Useless woman can't even stay healthy enough to work. And you—" He shoved her forward again, and Eden had to catch herself with her hands to keep from falling flat on her face. "You're just as worthless. 18 years old, and what do I got to show for it? Nothing but another mouth to feed." "That's enough." Thomas Crane had stepped forward, his young face flushed with anger. "Mr. Marlowe, you can't just—" "Can't what?" Caleb whirled on him, whiskey breath and rage. "Can't sell what's mine? She's my daughter, boy. I brought her into this world, and I'll do with her what I damn well please." "Actually," a new voice cut through the tension, steady and calm as deep water, "you can't." Every head turned toward the doorway. The man standing there was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to fill the frame. He wore a simple work shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, and canvas pants stained with honest dirt. His face was weathered by wind and sun, carved with lines that spoke of hard years and harder choices. But it was his eyes that caught Eden's attention, even through her humiliation, gray as storm clouds, and steady in a way that made something in her chest ache. She'd never seen him before. She would have remembered. "Who the hell are you?" Caleb demanded. The stranger stepped inside, his boots heavy on the floorboards. "Gideon Rhodes. I ranch about 12 miles north of here." His gaze swept the room, taking in the frozen townsfolk, Eden still kneeling on the floor, Caleb swaying with drunken aggression. "And I'm telling you that you can't sell your daughter like a mule. This ain't your business, Rhodes. You made it everyone's business the moment you dragged her in here." Gideon's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath it. "Now let her up." For a long moment, nobody moved. Eden could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, could feel tears threatening to spill over. She'd learned long ago not to cry in front of her father. It only made things worse. But right now, with this stranger defending her against her own pa, something inside her was cracking. Caleb's hand tightened on her shoulder, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "You don't tell me what to do with my own kin. Then I'll make you an offer." Gideon moved closer, and Eden caught the scent of pine and leather, clean sweat and open air, so different from the sour stink of her father. "You want flour and medicine. I'll pay for them. In exchange, your daughter comes with me." Eden's breath stopped. "Now wait just a minute," Ephraim started. "Not as property," Gideon continued, his eyes never leaving Caleb's face. "As a hired hand. I've got a house that needs tending and 3 children who need looking after. I'll pay her fair wages, more than she'd see staying with you, that's certain. She can send money back for your wife's medicine if she chooses." "If she chooses?" Caleb laughed, bitter and sharp. "She don't get to choose nothing. I'm her father. You're a drunk who just tried to sell his daughter for a sack of flour." Gideon's voice went quiet, dangerous. "Don't stand there and talk to me about being her father." The silence that followed was absolute. Mrs. Hewitt pressed a hand to her mouth. The Miller brothers had gone very still. Thomas Crane looked like he wanted to cheer. Caleb's face went purple with rage. "You self-righteous son of a—" "Here's how this works." Gideon cut him off, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a worn leather wallet. "I'm going to pay Ephraim for 1 50-pound sack of flour and 2 bottles of fever tonic. Then I'm going to walk out of here. And your daughter's going to decide for herself whether she comes with me or stays with you." He counted out bills onto the counter, more money than Eden had seen in months. Ephraim took them with shaking hands, his face caught between relief and uncertainty. "Get the flour and medicine," Gideon told him quietly. As Ephraim moved toward the back of the store, Caleb finally released Eden's shoulder. She slumped forward, catching herself on shaking arms. Her father's voice dropped to a hiss, meant only for her ears. "You walk out of here with him, girl, and you're dead to me. You hear? Dead. Don't you ever come back." Eden looked up at him, this man who was supposed to protect her, supposed to love her. His eyes were bloodshot and mean, his mouth twisted with cruelty. And she realized, with a clarity that was almost painful, that he'd never loved her at all. Maybe he'd never been capable of it. "Mama," she whispered, "I can't leave Mama alone with you." "Your mama's dying anyway," Caleb spat. "Ain't nothing you can do about that." The words hit her like a physical blow. Eden's vision swam with tears she refused to let fall. Ephraim returned with the flour sack over his shoulder and 2 brown bottles clinking in his other hand. He set them on the counter carefully, his eyes full of something that might have been pity. Gideon picked up the medicine first, examined the labels, then held them out. Not to Caleb, to Eden. "These are for your mother," he said gently. "Whether you come with me or not, these are yours to take to her." Eden stared at the bottles. Her hands trembled as she reached up and took them, the glass cool and solid against her palms. Real. This was real. Her voice cracked. "I need to take these to her, please. She's so sick, and I'm all she has, and I can't just—" "Where's your homestead?" Gideon asked. 3 miles south. The old Pritchard place, past where the creek bends." "But sir, I don't have money to pay you back for this, and Pa already owes—" "Consider it a gift." Gideon hoisted the flour sack easily onto his own shoulder. "I'll drive you home. You can tend to your mother, make sure she's settled with the medicine. Then you can decide what you want to do." "She don't get to decide," Caleb snarled. but there was desperation creeping into his voice now. He'd lost control of the situation, and he knew it. "She's my daughter, and she's staying with—" "If you follow us," Gideon said very quietly, "I will have every man in this store testify to what happened here today. You tried to sell your daughter, Marlo. That's not legal in Wyoming territory, and it sure as hell isn't Christian, so you take your whiskey money." He nodded toward where Ephraim had placed some small bills and coins on the counter, change from the medicine and flour, "and you go sleep it off, and you leave your daughter be." The two men stared at each other. Eden held her breath. Finally, Caleb grabbed the money and shoved it into his pocket. "Fine, take her. She's worthless anyway. Just another burden. See how long you last before you regret sticking your nose where it don't belong." He stormed toward the door, shoving past Gideon hard enough that any other man might have stumbled. But Gideon stood solid as an oak, barely swaying. The door slammed behind Caleb, and through the window Eden watched her father stagger toward the saloon across the dusty street. The store remained frozen in tableau. Mrs. Hewitt looked like she might cry. Thomas Crane was gripping a seed catalog so hard it was crumpling in his hands. "Miss Marlowe," Gideon's voice was gentle. "Can you stand?" Eden realized she was still on her knees. Shame flooded through her again. She must look like a beggar, like something broken and pathetic. But when she tried to push herself up, her legs wouldn't cooperate. They'd gone numb from kneeling so long, and her whole body was shaking with shock and humiliation and fear. Without a word, Gideon set down the flour sack and extended his hand. Eden stared at it. His palm was calloused, scarred along the knuckles from honest work. Strong, steady. She placed her hand in his. His grip was warm and firm as he helped her to her feet, his other hand coming to her elbow to steady her when she swayed. He didn't grab, didn't pull, didn't hurt. He just helped. "Take a breath," he said quietly. "You're all right now." But she wasn't all right. Nothing was all right. Her father had just tried to trade her for flour in front of half the town. Her mother was dying, and this stranger, this man she'd never met, had just paid for her like she was something to be bought and sold, even if he claimed that wasn't his intention. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would you do this?" Gideon's expression was hard to read. "Because somebody needed to, and I was here. But you don't know me. You don't know anything about me." "I know enough." He picked up the flour sack again, settling it on his shoulder with ease. "I know that no woman should be treated the way your father just treated you. And I know that my children have been without a woman's care for 8 months now since their mother passed. So maybe we can help each other." Their mother passed. So he was a widower. That explained the sadness that lingered in those gray eyes, the weariness that sat on his shoulders heavier than any flour sack. "I have a wagon outside," he continued. "We'll take these supplies to your mother, make sure she's comfortable. Then you and I can talk about terms of employment, if you're interested, and if you're not, I'll drive you back here, and you can do whatever you think is best. No obligations, no debts, just a choice." A choice? When was the last time anyone had given her a choice? Eden looked around the store. Mrs. Hewitt was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Ephraim was nodding encouragingly. Thomas Crane stepped forward, his young face earnest. "Miss Eden," he said quietly, "you should go with him. Mr. Rhodes is a good man. Everyone knows it. And your father?" He trailed off, but the meaning was clear. Eden clutched the medicine bottles tighter. Her mother needed these. And maybe, just maybe, this was the hand of Providence her mother always talked about, reaching down in their darkest hour. "All right," she said, her voice barely steady. "All right, let's go see my mama." The wagon ride was silent except for the creak of wheels and the steady clip-clop of the horse's hooves. Gideon drove with easy competence, his hands relaxed on the reins. Eden sat beside him on the bench seat, her body rigid with tension, the medicine bottles pressed against her chest like treasures. She snuck glances at him from the corner of her eye. Up close, she could see more details, the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his jaw was set with determination but not anger. He looked to be in his mid-30s, maybe older. Hard living aged a person out here. "How long has your mother been sick?" he asked after a while, breaking the silence. "About 3 weeks.
Started as a cough, then the fever came. I've been doing what I can, but we don't have money for medicine, and Pa—" She stopped, pressing her lips together. "And your father drinks whatever money comes in." It wasn't a question. Eden nodded, shame burning in her throat. "That's not your fault," Gideon said simply. "A man's choices are his own." They turned off the main road onto a rutted path that wound through scrub grass and scattered sage. The Pritchard place, which the Marlows had been squatting in for 2 years now, came into view. It was barely more than a shack, the roof patched with whatever materials Caleb could find, the windows covered with oilcloth instead of glass. The small barn was leaning so far to one side it looked like a strong wind would knock it over. Eden's shame deepened. This was where she lived. This was what she came from. If Gideon judged her for it, though, he didn't show it. He simply set the brake and climbed down, coming around to help her from the wagon with that same steady courtesy. Then he hefted the flour sack and followed her toward the cabin. "Mama?" Eden pushed open the door, which hung crooked on its leather hinges. "Mama, I'm home. I brought medicine." "What?" The interior was dim and stifling hot. The single room served as kitchen, living area, and bedroom all at once. On a straw mattress in the corner, a thin shape stirred under a ragged quilt. "Eden?" The voice was weak, thready. "Baby, is that you?" "It's me, Mama." Eden hurried to her mother's side, kneeling beside the mattress. Her heart clenched at the sight of Mary Marlowe's face. Fever-bright eyes, cheeks hollow with illness, lips cracked and dry. "I brought fever tonic. We're going to get you better." "Where's your father?" "Don't worry about Pa right now." Eden opened one of the bottles with shaking hands. "Just drink this, please." She helped her mother sit up enough to swallow the bitter medicine, supporting her with one arm while trying not to cry at how light she felt, how fragile. When had her mother become so thin? How had Eden not noticed? "Who's that?" Mary's gaze had fixed on the doorway, where Gideon stood with the flour sack, his tall frame blocking most of the light. "This is Mr. Rhodes, Mama. He helped us. He bought the medicine and flour." Mary's fevered eyes sharpened with understanding, or maybe fear. "What does he want in return?" "Nothing, ma'am." Gideon moved into the room, setting the flour sack on the rickety table with surprising gentleness. "Just doing what's right." "Nothing's free," Mary whispered. "Not out here." "Mama, please don't—" Eden started, but Gideon raised a hand. "She's right to be cautious." He addressed Mary directly, his voice respectful. "Ma'am, I won't lie to you. I did make your daughter an offer to come work for me as a housekeeper and to help with my children. Fair wages, her own room, meals provided, but it's her choice whether to accept. No strings, no obligations beyond honest work for honest pay." Mary studied him for a long moment, her breath rattling in her chest. Then she reached out with a trembling hand and gripped Eden's wrist. "Is he telling the truth?" she whispered. "Did your father—" Eden couldn't speak. She just nodded. Her mother's face crumpled. "Oh, baby. Oh, Eden, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I've been too weak to protect you from him. I'm so sorry for everything." "Mama, no, this isn't your fault. None of this is your fault. Go with him." Mary squeezed her wrist with what little strength she had. "Go with this man. Get away from your father before he destroys you too." "But you need me." "Who's going to take care of you?" "I'm dying, Eden." Her mother said it matter-of-factly, without drama. "We both know it. I'm not getting better. And I won't have you waste your life watching me fade away in this godforsaken place. I won't." "Mama, listen to me." Mary pulled her closer, and Eden could smell the sickness on her, sour and wrong. "You're 18 years old. You're smart and strong and good. You deserve a life. You deserve to be somewhere safe, somewhere you're valued. Promise me you'll go." Tears were streaming down Eden's face now. "I can't leave you with him. Mama, please, I can't." "Mrs. Marlowe." Gideon spoke from near the table, where he'd been standing quietly. "I live about 3 hours' ride from here. Your daughter would be welcome to visit whenever she likes. Or if you want, once you're stronger, you could come stay with us too. I've got room." Mary's laugh was weak but genuine. "That's kind of you to say, sir.
But we both know I'm not getting stronger. She cupped Eden's face with a shaking hand. Go, baby. Live, for both of us. Eden pressed her forehead to her mother's, breathing in the scent of her, soap and sickness and the lavender she used to grow back when they had a real home, a real life, before everything fell apart. I love you, she whispered. I love you so much, Mama. Miss, I love you too, my sweet girl. Now go, before your father comes back. It took Eden 20 minutes to gather her belongings, which wasn't long because she barely had any. 2 dresses, one of them so patched it was more repair than original fabric. A hairbrush with half the bristles missing. A small Bible her mother had given her for her 10th birthday, its pages soft from reading. A tin cup. A shawl. Everything she owned fit into a single worn canvas bag. She changed into her better dress, the one with only a few patches, and tried to do something with her hair, which hung in a tangled brown braid down her back. Her reflection in the broken mirror over the wash basin showed a thin girl with frightened eyes and sunburned cheeks. Nothing special, nothing worth much of anything. Worthless, her father's voice echoed, just another burden. Eden closed her eyes and took a breath. Then she picked up her bag and walked back to her mother's bedside. Mary was sleeping now, the medicine already working to dull the fever's edge. Eden kissed her forehead gently, memorizing the feel of her mother's skin, the sound of her breathing. I'll come back, she promised softly. I'll come back as soon as I can. And I'll send money for more medicine. I promise, Mama. I promise. But Mary didn't stir, lost already in fever dreams. Gideon was waiting outside by the wagon. He'd refilled the water barrel and apparently checked on the few scraggly chickens scratching in the dirt. When he saw Eden emerge with her bag, he simply nodded and took it from her, placing it carefully in the wagon bed. Ready? He asked. Eden looked back at the leaning shack that had been her prison for 2 years. Somewhere in town, her father was probably drowning himself in whiskey, cursing her name. Her mother was inside, dying by inches. Yes, she said, and her voice only shook a little. I'm ready. Bust. They drove north as the sun climbed higher, turning the Wyoming landscape into wavering shades of gold and brown. Gideon didn't push conversation, and Eden was grateful. She stared at the horizon and tried to process everything that had happened in the span of a single morning. Her father had tried to sell her. This stranger had stopped him. Now she was riding to a new life, or at least a new situation, with no idea what awaited her. The children, she finally said, breaking the silence. You said there were 3? Yes, ma'am. Luke's 12, Eli's 8, and Sarah just turned 5 last month. And their mother? Catherine. His jaw tightened slightly. She died in February. Complications from childbirth. The baby didn't make it either. I'm sorry. So am I. He was quiet for a moment. They've been managing without her, but it's been hard. Luke tries to act like a man grown. Eli's gone quiet as a church mouse, and Sarah, he exhaled slowly. Sarah still sets a place at the table for her sometimes. Forgets her mother's not coming back. Eden's heart ached. That's a lot for them to carry. It is, and I haven't been as present as I should be. The ranch demands attention, and I've been trying to do the work of 2 people. 3, really. He glanced at her. I won't lie to you, Miss Marlowe. The house is a mess. The children are half wild, and I'm not always easy to work for. But I pay fair, I don't drink, and I keep my word. Those are the terms. What would you expect from me? Cooking, cleaning, laundry, mending, basic household tasks. Help with the children, making sure they eat properly, that Sarah gets tucked in at night, that the boys do their lessons. I don't expect you to be their mother, he added quickly. Just a steady presence, someone who cares whether they're all right. And my wages? Room and board plus $15 a month. You can keep every penny or send it wherever you choose. $15. That was more than Eden had ever had at once in her entire life. She could send money for her mother's medicine, maybe even save some for what? What did she want? What did she dream about besides just surviving? She didn't know. She'd never had the luxury of dreaming. What if... She hesitated. What if I'm not good at it? What if I can't do what you need? Gideon looked at her squarely. Then we'll figure it out together. I'm not looking for perfection, Miss Marlowe.
I'm looking for someone who'll try. That's all. Someone who'll try. Eden could do that. She'd been trying her whole life, trying to keep her mother alive, trying to stay out of her father's way, trying to make something out of nothing. At least now she'd be trying for herself. All right, she said. All right, Mr. Rhodes. I'll work for you. He nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his mouth. Then you can call me Gideon. Mr. Rhodes makes me sound like my father, and he was a hard man. Gideon. The name felt strange on her tongue, formal, biblical. And you can call me Eden. Eden. He said it thoughtfully, like he was tasting it. Your mother a religious woman? She was. Is. She named me for the garden, said every girl deserves to start life in paradise. Eden's laugh was bitter. Didn't quite work out that way. Paradise is overrated anyway, Gideon said. It's the surviving that makes you strong. They rode on. The landscape gradually changed as they traveled north, the scrubland giving way to rolling hills dotted with stands of pine and cottonwood. Eden saw cattle grazing in the distance, their brands too far away to read. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals. Finally, as afternoon shadows lengthened, Gideon pointed ahead. There, that's home. The Rhodes homestead sat in a shallow valley, protected from the wind by gentle slopes on 3 sides.
The house itself was weathered but solid, a 2-story wooden structure with a wide porch and a stone chimney. A barn stood nearby, in better repair than the house, and Eden could see a chicken coop, a root cellar, and what looked like a smokehouse. Fences ran in neat lines, enclosing pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. It wasn't grand, but it was real, permanent, cared for. It's beautiful, Eden whispered. Gideon looked surprised. It's seen better days. Catherine always wanted me to paint it, but I never got around to it. Now, he shrugged. As they approached, 3 figures emerged from the barn. 2 boys and a little girl, all 3 of them dirty and disheveled, watching the wagon with wary eyes. Luke was tall for 12, with his father's dark hair and strong jaw. He stood with his arms crossed, trying to look older than his years. Eli was smaller, sandy-haired, with cautious eyes that tracked every movement. And Sarah, tiny Sarah, with her blonde braids and grass-stained dress, gripped her oldest brother's hand like a lifeline. Gideon brought the wagon to a stop. Children, this is Miss Eden Marlowe. She's going to be staying with us for a while, helping around the house. 3 pairs of eyes studied her. Eden swallowed hard and climbed down from the wagon before Gideon could help her. She wanted to meet them on equal ground, not have them see her as someone who needed assistance. Hello, she said quietly. Silence. Luke's jaw tightened. We don't need help. Luke, Gideon's voice held warning. It's true. We've been managing fine on our own. We don't need some stranger coming in and... Your father thinks differently, Eden interrupted gently. And it's his house. But I understand you're wary. I would be too. That seemed to throw Luke off balance. He'd expected an argument, not agreement. I'll try not to be a burden, Eden continued, and I won't pretend to be something I'm not. I'm just here to work. Sarah tugged on Luke's hand. Is she going to cook supper? She whispered loudly. I'm hungry. Despite everything, the trauma of the day, the fear, the uncertainty, Eden felt her mouth twitch toward a smile. I can cook supper. What do you usually have? Whatever's easiest, Gideon said, hefting Eden's bag from the wagon, which lately has meant a lot of hardtack and beans. I can do better than that. Eden looked at the children. If you'll show me where the kitchen is? Eli spoke for the first time, his voice soft. Are you going to stay? The question hung in the air. 4 pairs of eyes watched her now, 3 children and their father, all of them waiting for her answer. Eden thought about her mother's words. Go, baby. Live. She thought about Gideon stepping into that store, paying for her freedom without asking anything in return except honest work. She thought about the way she'd felt kneeling on that floor, being traded like grain, and the way she felt now, still scared, still uncertain, but standing on her own 2 feet. Yes, she said, I'm going to stay. Sarah broke into a gap-toothed grin. Luke's scowl softened slightly. Eli just nodded, like he'd expected it. And Gideon looked at her with something in his eyes that might have been respect,
All right then, he said. Welcome to the Rhodes homestead, Eden. Let's get you settled.
The inside of the house was exactly what Gideon had warned her about, a disaster. Dishes were piled in the wash basin, some of them growing things Eden didn't want to identify. Clothes were scattered across every surface. The floor was tracked with mud and straw. The curtains hung crooked on their rods, and dust covered everything like a shroud. But underneath the mess, Eden could see potential. Good solid furniture, well made. A real cast iron stove. A table large enough for a family to gather around. Windows that would let in morning light once they were cleaned. I know it's bad, Gideon said from the doorway, sounding almost apologetic. I've been focused on keeping the ranch running, and the children. It's fine. Eden set down her bag and rolled up her sleeves. It just needs attention, that's all. Luke snorted. Good luck. Eden looked at him. I'll need help. If you want supper tonight, that is. We know how to make our own supper. I'm sure you do. But if we work together, it'll be better and faster. She turned to Eli. Can you show me where you keep the broom? The younger boy hesitated, then nodded, and disappeared toward what Eden assumed was a closet. Sarah, Eden continued, do you know where your father keeps the clean linens? In Mama's chest, Sarah said. Then her face fell. But we're not supposed to touch Mama's things. Gideon cleared his throat. It's all right, sweetheart. Miss Eden will need sheets and blankets for her room. You can show her. As the children scattered to their tasks, Eden caught Gideon watching her with an unreadable expression. What? She asked. Nothing, just, you're handling this well. I thought you might be overwhelmed. I've been overwhelmed before, Eden said simply. This is just a different kind of mess. She started with the dishes, heating water on the stove and scrubbing each plate and cup until it shone. Luke watched her with undisguised suspicion, but when she handed him a drying cloth without comment, he took it. They worked in silence, falling into an easy rhythm. Eli returned with the broom and began sweeping without being asked. Sarah brought an armful of linens, then started gathering dirty clothes into a basket, humming tunelessly under her breath. And Gideon just watched for a moment, something like wonder crossing his face. Then he nodded once and headed out to tend to the evening chores. As Eden worked, she found herself relaxing slightly. This she knew how to do. This made sense. Honest labor, clear results. Take something broken and make it whole again. By the time the sun started its descent toward the horizon, the kitchen was clean, the table was set, and Eden had managed to make a proper meal from the supplies she'd found in the root cellar: fried salt pork, pan biscuits, and stewed carrots with a little precious sugar for sweetness. When Gideon came in for supper, he stopped in the doorway and just stared. You did all this in 3 hours? The children helped. Eden wiped her hands on her apron, one she'd found hanging on a peg, probably Catherine's. It was too big for her, but she'd cinched it tight. Supper's ready, if you're hungry. They gathered around the table, Gideon at the head, Luke and Eli on one side, Sarah and Eden on the other. Sarah insisted on setting that extra place, and nobody said anything when she whispered, "Hi, Mama," to the empty chair. Eden watched as Gideon said a simple blessing, then served the children before himself. Good manners. Her father had never bothered with such things. The first bite of biscuit made Luke's eyes widen. Eli made a small sound of pleasure. Sarah kicked her feet happily under the table. This is good, Luke said, like the admission was being dragged from him. Really good. Thank you. Our mother used to make biscuits on Sundays, Eli said softly. Yours taste almost like hers. The table went quiet. Eden's throat tightened with sympathy. I'm not trying to replace your mother, she said gently. I want you to know that, but I'm glad you like the biscuits. Gideon caught her eye across the table and nodded slightly. A silent thank you. They ate in relative peace, passing dishes and refilling cups. It was strange and comfortable all at once, like Eden was watching someone else's life, someone who belonged in a warm house with a family around a table, someone who mattered. After supper, she shooed the children off to wash up while she cleaned the dishes. This time, Luke helped without being asked. As they worked, he spoke quietly. Why'd you really come here? Eden considered lying, making up something noble or impressive. But this boy had lost his mother 8 months ago. He deserved the truth. My father tried to trade me for a sack of flour, she said simply.
Your father stopped him. Luke's hand stilled on the plate he was drying. He tried to sell you? Yes. That's... He struggled for words. That's awful. It was. But your father gave me a choice, to come here and work, or to stay. I chose to come here. Why? Because, Eden said quietly, I wanted to be somewhere I might be worth more than a bag of flour. Luke was quiet for a long moment. Then, awkwardly, he said, I'm glad you came. Sarah needs someone. She's been sad for a long time. What about you? Have you been sad? He stiffened. I'm fine. All right. Eden didn't push. But if you're not fine sometime, that's all right too. He looked at her like she'd said something shocking. Then he hung up the drying cloth and walked away without another word. Later, after the children were in bed, Luke in the loft, Eli and Sarah sharing a small bedroom upstairs, Gideon showed Eden to her room. It was small but private, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window overlooking the pastures. It's not much, he said, but it's yours. Lock on the door if you want it. Eden looked at the lock. A simple hook-and-eye latch, but real privacy nonetheless. When had she last had privacy? Thank you, she whispered. Gideon hesitated in the doorway. What you said to Luke about your father, is it true? Yes. His jaw tightened. I'm sorry that happened to you, and I'm sorry I couldn't step in sooner. You stepped in at all. That's more than anyone else did. They stood there in the gathering darkness, two people brought together by circumstance and cruelty, trying to figure out what came next. Finally, Gideon said, Get some rest. Tomorrow will come early. But after he left, Eden didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window at the stars emerging over the Wyoming hills. And for the first time since her father had dragged her into that store, she let herself cry, not from fear or shame, but from something that felt almost like hope. She'd survived today. She'd made it to the other side. And tomorrow she'd wake up in a house where no one thought she was worthless. It wasn't paradise, but it was hers. The first week passed in a blur of work and silence. Eden woke before dawn each morning to the sound of roosters crowing and Gideon's boots on the wooden stairs as he headed out to begin the day's labor. She'd dress quickly in the dim light, splash cold water on her face from the basin in her room, and make her way downstairs to light the stove and start breakfast. The children emerged slowly, like cautious animals testing the safety of open ground. Luke always came down first, his face closed off and guarded. He'd nod at her, barely a greeting, and head outside to help his father with the morning feeding. Eli would appear next, slipping into the kitchen quiet as a shadow. He never spoke unless spoken to, but he'd watch her with those careful eyes while she cooked, absorbing everything she did. Sarah was last, tumbling down the stairs with sleep-tangled hair and her nightgown twisted around her legs. She was the only one who seemed willing to let Eden close, though even she maintained a careful distance, as if expecting Eden to disappear at any moment like her mother had. That first morning, Eden had made simple oatmeal with dried apples and a drizzle of molasses. She'd set the bowls on the table and called the family to eat, her heart pounding with nervousness. Would they like it? Would they accept her presence here, or would she remain forever an outsider? Gideon had eaten steadily, his face unreadable. Luke had hunched over his bowl like he was protecting it. Eli had eaten in tiny, precise bites, and Sarah had pushed the oatmeal around with her spoon, making patterns in the molasses. You need to eat, sweetheart, Eden had said gently. I'm not hungry, Sarah had whispered. She never eats breakfast anymore, Luke had said, his tone defensive. We've tried. Eden had looked at the little girl, 5 years old and already carrying grief too heavy for her small shoulders. She'd crouched down beside Sarah's chair, meeting her at eye level. You don't have to eat it all, she'd said softly. But could you eat just 3 bites? For me? Sarah had studied her with solemn blue eyes. Why? Because I made it special for you, and because growing girls need their strength. That's what Mama used to say. The words had hung in the air like a benediction and a curse. Eden had felt every eye at the table turn toward her, waiting to see how she'd respond. Your mama was right, she'd said simply, and I bet she'd want you to eat breakfast, even when you don't feel like it. Sarah had considered this with the seriousness only a child could muster.
Then she'd picked up her spoon and taken one bite, then another, then a third. Good girl, Eden had murmured, and stood up before the emotion threatening to close her throat could show on her face. That small victory had felt enormous. By the third day, Sarah had started lingering in the kitchen after breakfast, watching Eden work. She didn't talk much, but her presence was a start. She'd hand Eden things without being asked: the dishcloth when Eden's hands were wet, the flour tin when Eden was making bread, the broom when the floor needed sweeping. Eli had begun speaking to her in fragments. The butter's in the root cellar, and Papa likes his coffee strong. And once, shyly, that dress makes your eyes look green. Eden had thanked him for each piece of information, storing them away like precious stones. Luke remained the hardest wall to breach. He was polite in that stiff, formal way that made it clear he was only being civil because his father expected it. He did what Eden asked without complaint, but he never volunteered anything, never smiled, never looked at her directly if he could help it. Eden understood. He was 12 years old and the man of the house in his own mind, and she was an intruder in his mother's space. She didn't push. She just kept showing up, kept being steady, kept proving that she wasn't going anywhere. The house began to transform under her attention. She scrubbed floors until the wood grain showed through years of accumulated dirt. She washed windows until they sparkled in the morning sun. She beat rugs and aired out rooms and mended curtains that had been hanging in tatters. She found Catherine's garden behind the house, overgrown with weeds but still alive underneath, and spent hours clearing it, salvaging what vegetables she could. Gideon watched all of this with quiet appreciation. He didn't praise her, that wasn't his way, but she'd catch him sometimes, standing in a doorway or pausing on his way to the barn, just looking at the transformed space with something like wonder in his eyes. On the fourth evening, after the children were in bed, he'd found her in the kitchen finishing the last of the dishes. The lamp cast golden light across the now clean surfaces, making everything glow. "You've done good work here," he'd said simply. Eden had looked up from the pot she was scrubbing. "It's what you hired me for." "Still, it's more than I expected." He'd hesitated, then added, "Catherine would have appreciated it. She always wanted the house to be welcoming. I let it fall apart after she died." Grief does that sometimes, makes it hard to care about the small things. "You speak from experience." Eden had set down the pot carefully. "My mother's dying, so, yes, I understand what it's like to lose someone slowly, piece by piece, and not be able to stop it." Gideon had been quiet for a long moment. Then he'd said, "I haven't asked about your mother. That was wrong of me. Do you want to go visit her? I can spare you for a day." The offer had been so unexpected, so kind, that Eden had felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you. I'd like that. I want to bring her some of the money you're paying me, get her more medicine if she needs it. We'll go on Sunday. I'll drive you." "You don't have to." "I know, but I will." That had been the end of the conversation, but something had shifted between them. Some invisible barrier had lowered just slightly, allowing them to see each other more clearly. Now, a week after her arrival, Eden stood at the stove frying bacon for breakfast while the morning light streamed through the clean windows. Sarah sat at the table drawing on the back of an old feed sack with a stub of pencil, humming that tuneless song she always hummed. Eli was setting the table with careful precision, making sure each fork and knife was perfectly aligned. Luke came in from the morning chores, his shirt damp with sweat despite the early hour. He glanced at Eden, then away, then back again. "Something smells good," he said, the words coming out almost grudging. "Bacon and eggs, and I made biscuits." Eden flipped the bacon expertly. "There's coffee in the pot if you want some." He poured himself a cup, added sugar the way his father did, and stood near the window drinking it. After a moment, he said, "The garden's looking better." It was the first voluntary observation he'd made to her. Eden kept her voice casual, not wanting to scare him off. "I found some squash plants that are still producing, and the carrots should be ready to harvest soon." "Mama loved that garden. She used to make us help weed it, even when we complained." "Did you complain a lot?" "All the time." The ghost of a smile crossed his face, then disappeared. "She'd say we were building character. I didn't know what that meant then." "Do you know now?" He looked at her directly for the first time since she'd arrived. "Yeah, I think I do." Before Eden could respond, Gideon came through the door, bringing with him the smell of hay and horses and morning air. His eyes swept the kitchen, the clean surfaces, the food cooking, his children gathered and calm, and something in his expression softened. "Smells like heaven in here," he said. "Just breakfast," Eden replied, but warmth spread through her chest at the compliment. They gathered at the table the way they'd begun to do every morning, falling into a rhythm that was becoming routine. Eden served the food while Gideon said the blessing. The children ate with better appetite than they'd had a week ago. Even Sarah managed to finish most of her eggs without prompting. "Papa," Sarah said suddenly, "can Miss Eden braid my hair like Mama used to, the way with the ribbons?" The table went still. Luke's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Eli stared at his plate. Gideon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Eden's heart sank. She'd overstepped somehow, taken up too much space, made the children too comfortable when they should have been protecting their mother's memory. But Gideon just looked at his daughter and said gently, "If Miss Eden's willing, I don't see why not." "I'd be happy to," Eden said softly. "Do you remember where your mother kept the ribbons?" "In her sewing basket, the blue one by the window." After breakfast, while the boys helped their father with the livestock and Eden cleaned the kitchen, Sarah retrieved the sewing basket. It was made of woven willow, faded but sturdy, and when Eden opened it, she found it full of treasures, spools of thread in every color, needles carefully organized by size, buttons saved from worn-out clothes, and yes, ribbons, dozens of them, some new and some frayed from use. "Mama said ribbons make every day special," Sarah whispered, running her fingers over the silky strips. "Even hard days. Your mama was a wise woman." "Do you have a mama?" "I do. She's sick right now, but your father's going to take me to see her on Sunday." Sarah processed this information with that serious expression children got when they were thinking hard about something. "Is your mama nice?" "Very nice. She tells me stories and sings songs, even when she doesn't feel well." "My mama used to sing too, but then the baby came and she got sick and she stopped singing and then—" Sarah's voice hitched. "And then she went away." Eden knelt down, bringing herself to Sarah's level. "She didn't want to go away, sweetheart. I'm sure of that. Sometimes people get sick, and no matter how hard they fight or how much they're loved, they just can't get better. But that doesn't mean they wanted to leave. Luke says she's in heaven with baby Jacob. I believe that too. Do you think she can see us from heaven, see that I'm growing and Eli learned to read better and Luke's almost as tall as Papa now? I think if anyone can see through heaven to earth, it's mothers watching their children." Sarah seemed satisfied with this answer. She climbed onto a chair and sat patiently while Eden carefully combed out her tangled hair and began braiding it. Her hair was fine and blonde, so different from Eden's own thick brown waves. Eden worked gently, trying to remember how her own mother had braided her hair when she was small, back before everything had fallen apart. "You're good at this," Sarah said. "Did your mama teach you?" "She did. A long time ago, when things were different." "What changed?" "My father changed. Or maybe he was always the way he is and I just didn't see it when I was small." Eden wove a blue ribbon through the braid, matching Sarah's eyes. "But your father's not like that. He's a good man." "I know. He's the best papa." Sarah paused, then added carefully, "Are you going to marry him?" Eden's hand stilled in shock. "What?" "Luke says that's probably why you came here, because Papa needs a wife, and we need a mama." "No, sweetheart, that's not—" Eden resumed braiding, trying to keep her voice steady. "I came here to work, to help with the house and cooking and taking care of you children, that's all." "But don't you like him?" "Of course I do. He's been very kind to me, but liking someone and marrying them are very different things." "Oh." Sarah sounded disappointed. Then, with the brutal honesty of children, "I wish you could be our mama, though. You're nice and you smell good and you don't yell." Eden's throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you, honey. That means a lot to me. But your mama will always be your mama, even if I'm here helping. Nobody can replace her." "Eli says that too. He says Mama's watching from heaven and she'd be mad if we forgot her." "I don't think she'd be mad. But I think she'd be happy if you remembered her, the songs she sang, and the things she taught you, and the way she loved you. Those memories are precious. Eden tied off the braid with the blue ribbon and turned Sarah around to face her. There. Beautiful. Want to see? She held up a small mirror from the sewing basket. Sarah looked at her reflection and broke into a smile so bright it could have lit the whole house. It's just like Mama used to do it. Good. Now you can show your brothers. Sarah jumped down from the chair and ran outside, hollering for Luke and Eli to come see her hair. Eden sat back on her heels, emotionally exhausted from the conversation. She hadn't expected the children to grow attached so quickly, and she certainly hadn't expected them to start imagining her as a replacement for their mother. That wasn't why she was here. She was hired help, nothing more. She couldn't let herself forget that, couldn't let herself start thinking of this place as home, or these children as hers, or Gideon as anything other than her employer. But oh, it was tempting, so tempting to let herself believe she could belong here, could build something permanent and good. The week continued its rhythm. Eden cooked and cleaned, tended the garden, and mended clothes. She taught Eli his letters in the evenings, sounding out words from the worn Bible she'd brought from home. She helped Luke with the evening chores when Gideon was working late in the far pastures. She tucked Sarah in every night, listening to rambling stories about imaginary friends and wishes on stars. And she watched Gideon, though she tried not to let him catch her doing it. He was different from any man she'd known. He moved through the world with quiet competence, never wasting motion or words. He was gentle with the animals, patient with his children, fair in his dealings. She'd seen him spend an hour coaxing a frightened calf to take milk from a bottle, his voice low and soothing. She'd watched him teach Luke how to properly saddle a horse, correcting him with respect rather than criticism. He worked from dawn until well past dark most days, his body bearing the wear of constant labor. Eden noticed the way he favored his left shoulder sometimes, saw him wince when he thought no one was looking. One evening, she'd found him in the barn, trying to lift a heavy sack of feed with one hand while the other hung useless at his side. "Let me help," she'd said, stepping forward before he could protest. "I've got it. Your shoulder's hurt. I can see it from here. Now either let me help or admit you're too proud to accept assistance from a woman." He'd looked at her with surprise, then something that might have been amusement. "You're direct. Life's too short to dance around things. What happened?" "Old injury. Acts up when the weather's about to change." "From what?" "Bull threw me against a fence 5 years back, healed crooked." He'd finally let her take part of the weight, and together they'd moved the feed sack. "Catherine used to make me poultices for it. Comfrey and arnica, I think. I can make those. My mother taught me about herbs. You don't have to." "I know I don't have to, but I'm offering anyway. Unless you'd rather keep suffering in noble silence." That had gotten an actual smile from him, small and fleeting, but real. "You've got a sharp tongue when you want to, don't you?" "Only when dealing with stubborn men." "Fair enough. I'd appreciate the poultice." She'd made it that night, grinding the dried herbs she'd found growing wild near the creek, mixing them with hot water to form a paste. Gideon had sat at the kitchen table after the children were asleep, his shirt removed so she could apply the mixture to his shoulder. Eden had tried to keep her hands clinical, professional, but she couldn't help noticing the strength in his frame, the scars that marked his skin, a map of a hard life lived. "Catherine used to say I was too stubborn for my own good," he'd said quietly as she worked. "Was she right?" "Usually. She was usually right about most things." He'd been quiet for a moment. "Thank you for this, and for everything else you've been doing. The house feels alive again. I didn't realize how dead it had gotten." "You were grieving. You're still grieving. The children need more than a grieving father, though. They need stability, normal life. You've given them that. They're good children. They make it easy. They're warming up to you, even Luke, though he'd never admit it." Eden had finished applying the poultice and stepped back. "He's protective. Of you, of their mother's memory. That's not a bad thing." "No, but it must be hard being viewed with suspicion." "I've dealt with worse." Their eyes had met, and in that moment, Eden had felt something shift, some connection that went beyond employer and employee, beyond shared space and circumstance, something that frightened her with its intensity. "I should let you rest," she'd said, breaking eye contact and moving quickly to clean up the herbs. Eden. He'd said her name softly, and she'd frozen. You're safe here. I want you to know that. For as long as you want to stay, you have a place. She'd nodded, not trusting her voice, and fled to her room before she could do something foolish like cry, or thank him too effusively, or admit that she was starting to think of this place as home. Sunday came with clear skies and cool wind. Gideon hitched the wagon early, and after breakfast, he and Eden set out for the Marlowe homestead. The children stayed behind. Luke was old enough to watch his siblings for a few hours, and Eden thought it best not to expose them to whatever they might find at her father's place. The ride was quieter than their first journey together. Eden clutched the small bundle of money she'd saved from her first week's wages. Not much, but enough for more medicine and maybe some decent food for her mother. Her stomach churned with anxiety. What would they find? Would her mother be better or worse? Would her father be there, drunk and mean? You're worried, Gideon observed. Wouldn't you be? Yes, but your mother's stronger than you think. She raised you, didn't she? That takes strength. She deserves better than what life gave her. Most people do. As they approached the leaning shack, Eden's anxiety spiked. The place looked even more desolate than she remembered, like it was actively surrendering to entropy, giving up its fight against wind and time. I'll come with you, Gideon said, setting the brake. You don't have to. I know, but I will anyway. They approached the door together. Eden knocked softly, then pushed it open when there was no answer. The interior was dim and stifling, and for one terrible moment she thought they'd come too late, that her mother was... Eden? The voice was weak but unmistakably alive. Baby, is that you? Relief flooded through her. Yes, Mama. I'm here. Mary Marlowe was still in bed, still thin and pale, but her eyes were clearer than they'd been a week ago. The fever had broken, though Eden could see the illness had taken its toll. Her mother looked older, more fragile, like she was made of paper that might tear at any moment. You came back, Mary whispered. I thought maybe you'd be smart and stay away. Of course I came back. Eden knelt beside the mattress and took her mother's hand. How are you feeling? Better. The medicine helped, though your father wasn't happy about me using it, said I was wasting his investment. Eden's jaw tightened. Where is he? Town, probably, or passed out in the barn. I don't keep track anymore. Mary's gaze moved past Eden to where Gideon stood in the doorway. Mr. Rhodes, you're still here. Still here, ma'am? How's the fever? Gone, mostly. Still weak as a kitten, but alive. She squeezed Eden's hand. Tell me about this past week. Are you all right? Has he treated you well? More than well, Mama. The house is good. The children are sweet. And Mr. Rhodes is... Eden paused, searching for the right words. He's a good man, an honest man. I can see that. Mary studied Gideon with sharp eyes despite her weakness. You're a widower, aren't you? I can see it in the way you stand, like you're carrying something heavy. Yes, ma'am. Lost my wife in February. I'm sorry. That's a hard weight to bear. She turned back to Eden. But you're happy there? Truly? Truly. For the first time in years, I feel... Eden struggled to articulate it. I feel like I matter. Like what I do makes a difference. Tears slipped down Mary's thin cheeks. That's all I ever wanted for you, to know your worth. Eden pulled out the small bundle of money. I brought this. For more medicine, for food. I'll bring more next week if I can. No. Mary pushed the money back. You keep it. Save it for yourself. Mama, please. Eden Rose Marlowe, you listen to me. Despite her weakness, Mary's voice held authority. I'm dying. We both know it. That medicine bought me a little time, but not much. I don't want you spending your hard-earned money on a losing battle. Don't say that. It's the truth, and truth matters. Mary cupped Eden's face with a trembling hand. What matters now is that you build a life, a real life, somewhere safe. Promise me you'll do that. Promise me you won't come back here after I'm gone. Mama, promise me. Mary's grip tightened with surprising strength. Your father will drag you down with him if you let him. He'll take everything you have and leave you with nothing but bitterness. Don't let him do that. Don't let him win." Eden couldn't speak past the tears clogging her throat. She just nodded, and her mother relaxed back against the thin pillow. "Good girl, my good, brave girl." Mary looked at Gideon again. "Take care of her, Mr. Rhodes. She's stronger than she knows, but she's been hurt. Be patient with her." "I intend to, ma'am." They stayed for another hour, during which Eden cleaned her mother's small space, brought fresh water, and left the money despite Mary's protests, hidden under the mattress where her father wouldn't immediately find it. She told her mother stories about Sarah's drawings and Eli's reading lessons and Luke's slow thaw. She made her mother laugh with descriptions of the household disasters she'd navigated: bread that wouldn't rise, a chicken that had gotten into the kitchen, Sarah's attempt to help wash dishes that had resulted in more water on the floor than in the basin. When it was time to leave, Eden held her mother for a long moment, memorizing the feel of her arms, the scent of her skin, the sound of her heartbeat. "I love you, Mama." "I love you too, baby, more than all the stars in the sky. Now go. Go build that life. Be happy. That's all I want." The ride back to the Rhodes homestead was silent except for Eden's quiet crying. She tried to hide it, turning her face away and wiping at her tears with her sleeve, but Gideon knew. After a while, he simply handed her a clean handkerchief without comment. "She's going to die," Eden said finally, her voice raw. "Soon, I think. And I can't stop it." "No, you can't. I should stay with her. I should be there when—" "Eden," Gideon's voice was gentle but firm. "What did your mother ask you to do?" "To build a life. To be happy." "Then honor her wishes. The best way you can love her now is to do what she wants, to live well, to be safe. That's the gift you can give her." Eden knew he was right, but it didn't make it hurt less. They rode on as the sun climbed higher, and by the time the Rhodes homestead came into view, Eden had cried herself dry. She felt hollowed out, exhausted, but also somehow lighter, like she'd been given permission to let go of a burden she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten it wasn't part of her. The children came running when they saw the wagon. Sarah reached them first, practically bouncing with excitement. "Miss Eden! Miss Eden! Luke let me help cook lunch and I only spilled the milk a little bit, and Eli read a whole page from the Bible without any help, and we cleaned the kitchen just like you do." Despite everything, Eden felt herself smile. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart." She climbed down from the wagon and let Sarah take her hand, letting the little girl pull her toward the house to see their accomplishments. Behind her, she heard Luke ask his father quietly, "Is she all right?" And Gideon's response, "She will be. Give her time." That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Eden stood at her window looking out at the star-filled sky. Somewhere to the south, her mother was looking at these same stars, counting down her final days. And here, in this weathered house with these scarred people, Eden was building something new. She didn't know how long it would last, didn't know if Gideon would tire of her, if the children would eventually resent her presence, if her father would come looking for her with demands and threats. The future was uncertain and frightening in its vastness. But for now, for tonight, she had a room with a lock on the door and clean sheets on the bed. She had children who smiled when they saw her, and a man who treated her with respect. She had work that mattered, and hands that were useful. It wasn't paradise, but it was hers. And maybe that was enough. 3 weeks later, Eden stood in the kitchen kneading bread dough when she heard the rider approaching. The steady rhythm of hoofbeats carried through the open window along with the late September breeze, and something about the sound made her hand still in the flour-dusted dough. It was mid-morning on a Wednesday, not a time when they typically had visitors. Gideon and Luke were out mending fences in the north pasture, Eli was in the barn organizing tack, and Sarah was at the table carefully practicing her letters on a slate. Eden wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the window. A man on a tired-looking horse was riding up the path toward the house, and even from a distance she could see the official look of him: clean shirt, leather satchel, the bearing of someone who carried important news. Her stomach dropped. She knew what this meant before he even dismounted. "Sarah, sweetheart, go find Eli in the barn," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Stay with him until I come get you." "But I'm not done with my letters." "Now please." Something in Eden's tone made Sarah obey without further question. The little girl scrambled down from her chair and ran out the back door, her blonde braids bouncing against her shoulders. Eden waited until she was out of sight, then walked to the front door and opened it just as the man was climbing the porch steps. He was middle-aged, with kind eyes, and a weathered face that spoke of long hours in the saddle. He removed his hat when he saw her, a gesture of respect that would have been touching under different circumstances. "Ma'am, I'm looking for Miss Eden Marlowe. Been told she might be here at the Rhodes place." Eden's throat tightened. "I'm Eden Marlowe. I'm Deputy Carson from Dry Hollow. I'm sorry to be bringing you this news, but—" He paused, clearly uncomfortable. "Your mother passed 3 days ago. Doc Henderson was with her at the end. He said she went peacefully." The words hit Eden like a physical blow, even though she'd been expecting them, preparing for them. Knowing something was coming didn't make its arrival any less devastating. "3 days ago," she repeated numbly. "Yes, ma'am. We tried to find you sooner, but folks in town weren't sure where you'd gone. It was old Ephraim Tully who remembered Mr. Rhodes bringing you here." Deputy Carson shifted his weight, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. "There's the matter of burial. Your father, well, he hasn't made any arrangements. Been on a 3-day drunk since your mother passed, from what I hear." Of course he had. Eden closed her eyes briefly, fighting the wave of grief and rage that threatened to overwhelm her. Her mother had died alone, and her father had gone looking for the bottom of a whiskey bottle. "I'll make the arrangements," she said, her voice coming from somewhere far away. When is the burial?" "That's for you to decide, ma'am. Doc Henderson has the body at his place, keeping her as best he can. But in this heat—" He trailed off delicately. "Tomorrow," Eden said. "Can it be tomorrow?" "I'll let Doc know. Dry Hollow Cemetery, I assume?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. The deputy put his hat back on and turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, Miss Marlowe, your mother was a good woman. Folks in town knew it, even if they didn't always show it. She deserved better than she got." "Yes," Eden whispered. "She did." She stood on the porch long after the deputy had ridden away, staring at nothing, feeling nothing. She should cry. She knew she should cry. But the tears wouldn't come. There was just this vast emptiness inside her, like someone had scooped out everything that made her human and left behind a hollow shell. "Eden?" She turned to find Gideon standing at the bottom of the porch steps, his face creased with concern. He must have seen the deputy from the pasture and come to investigate. Luke stood behind him, tall and uncertain. "My mother died," she said, and her voice sounded strange to her own ears, flat, distant. 3 days ago. I need to go to Dry Hollow tomorrow for the burial." Gideon climbed the steps and stood beside her. He didn't touch her, didn't offer empty platitudes. He just stood there, solid and present, and somehow that was exactly what she needed. "We'll all go," he said simply, "as a family." "You don't have to—" "Yes, we do." His voice was gentle but firm. No one should bury their mother alone. That's when the tears finally came. The next morning dawned gray and cold, as if the sky itself was mourning. Eden dressed in her only black dress, a threadbare thing she'd brought from home, and braided her hair with shaking hands. She looked at herself in the small mirror over her wash basin and barely recognized the pale, hollow-eyed woman staring back. The children were subdued at breakfast. Even Sarah seemed to understand the gravity of the day, eating her oatmeal in silence instead of chattering as she usually did. Eli kept glancing at Eden with worried eyes. Luke had stood outside her door that morning and said gruffly, "I'm sorry about your ma," before fleeing back to his chores. Gideon had the wagon ready by the time the sun cleared the horizon. He'd hitched their best horses and laid clean blankets on the bench seats. The children climbed into the back without being asked, sitting close together like they drew strength from proximity. The ride to Dry Hollow took 3 hours. No one spoke much. Eden stared at the landscape rolling past, the same hills and scrub grass she'd looked at the day Gideon had first brought her to his home. The day she'd thought her life was ending when really it had been beginning. Her mother had still been alive then. Sick, dying, but alive. Breathing. Hoping for Eden's future. Now she was gone, and Eden felt unmoored, like a boat that had slipped its anchor and was drifting out to sea. They reached Dry Hollow just before noon. The town looked exactly as Eden remembered: dusty Main Street, a handful of buildings clustered together, the church steeple rising above everything else like an accusing finger pointing at heaven. A small group had already gathered at the cemetery on the hill behind the church. Not many, but more than Eden had expected. She recognized Doc Henderson, Ephraim Tully and his wife, young Thomas Crane, a few others whose names she'd never learned. What surprised her was seeing women from town. Mrs. Hewitt, who'd been in the store that terrible day, the Miller brothers' mother, even the pastor's wife. They stood in a small cluster dressed in their Sunday blacks, faces somber with genuine sympathy. Gideon helped Eden down from the wagon, his hand steady on her elbow. The children followed, Sarah gripping Eli's hand so tight her knuckles were white. Luke stood close to his father, trying to look grown up and failing. He was still just a boy, Eden realized, no matter how hard he tried to be a man. The grave had already been dug, a dark rectangle in the rocky soil. Beside it sat a simple pine coffin. Doc Henderson approached as they walked up the hill, his expression kind but weary. "Miss Marlowe, I'm sorry for your loss. Your mother was a brave woman." "Thank you for being with her," Eden managed. "I'm glad she wasn't alone. She spoke of you at the end, wanted me to tell you she was proud of the woman you'd become." He paused. "Your father's not here. Thought you should know." Of course he wasn't. Caleb Marlowe wouldn't interrupt his drinking to bury his wife. Eden felt a flash of anger so hot it nearly burned away the grief, but only for a moment. Then the emptiness returned, vast and echoing. The service was brief. The pastor read from Psalms and spoke generically about faith and eternal rest. Eden barely heard him. She stared at the pine box and tried to reconcile the fact that her mother, her vibrant, loving, broken mother, was inside it, still and silent forever. When it came time to lower the coffin into the ground, Gideon and Doc Henderson and Thomas Crane took the ropes. They worked with careful reverence, easing the box down into the earth. The sound of dirt hitting wood was the worst thing Eden had ever heard. People began to drift away after the first shovelful of soil fell. They touched Eden's shoulder as they passed, murmuring condolences she couldn't quite process. Mrs. Hewitt pressed a handkerchief into her hand. Ephraim's wife left a basket of food near the wagon. Finally, only the Rhodes family remained, standing vigil as the grave was filled. Sarah had started crying quietly, and Eli had his arm around her shoulders. Luke stood rigid, staring at the ground, and Eden realized he was crying too. For his own mother, probably. The grief still raw and unhealed. "Do you want to say something?" Gideon asked softly. Sometimes words help. Eden looked at the mound of fresh earth that marked where her mother lay. What could she possibly say that would be adequate? How could she sum up a life, a love, a loss in mere words? But she stepped forward anyway because her mother deserved to be acknowledged, deserved to have her daughter speak truth over her grave. "You taught me what love looks like," Eden said, her voice breaking. "Even when you had nothing else to give, you gave me that. You taught me to be strong when I wanted to break, to hope when everything seemed hopeless, to believe I was worth more than the price other people put on me." She wiped at her tears with the back of her hand. "I'm going to live, Mama, the way you wanted me to. I'm going to build something good and true. I'm going to be happy. I promise you that." The wind picked up, rustling through the dry grass, and Eden chose to believe it was her mother's way of saying she'd heard. They were loading back into the wagon when the trouble came. Eden heard him before she saw him, that familiar, slurred cursing that had been the soundtrack of her childhood. She turned and saw Caleb Marlowe staggering up the hill from town, his clothes filthy, his face purple with drink and rage. "There you are!" he bellowed, pointing at Eden with a shaking finger. "Thought you could just leave, did you? Thought you could abandon your own father?" Gideon immediately moved between Eden and Caleb, his body language shifting into something protective and dangerous. "That's far enough, Marlowe." "Get out of my way, Rhodes. That's my daughter." "That's a grown woman who doesn't want anything to do with you." Gideon's voice was quiet, deadly. "Now turn around and go sleep it off before you embarrass yourself further." "Embarrass myself?" Caleb laughed, bitter and ugly. You're the one who stole my daughter, turned her against me. You owe me— I owe you nothing. Eden stepped out from behind Gideon, fury suddenly burning through her grief. You sold me, remember? For flour. You told me I was worthless, that I was a burden. You didn't even come to your own wife's burial. Because she was worthless too, both of you, nothing but weight around my neck. Stop. The command came from Luke, who had stepped forward with his fists clenched and his young face twisted with righteous anger. You don't get to talk to her like that. Caleb squinted at the boy. Who the hell are you? I'm Luke Rhodes, and Miss Eden is— He faltered, searching for the right words. She's part of our family now. She takes care of us. She matters. And if you think you're going to hurt her or take her back to that falling down shack, you're wrong. Luke, get back, Gideon said, but there was pride in his voice beneath the concern. No, Papa. Somebody needs to stand up for her the way she stands up for us. Luke took another step toward Caleb, and despite being only 12 years old, despite facing down a grown man, he didn't back down. You're a drunk and a coward. Miss Eden deserves better than you. We all do. For a moment, Caleb just stared at the boy. Then his face twisted with something that might have been shame or rage. With him, they looked the same. He turned his bleary eyes on Eden. You turned my own daughter against me, poisoned her mind. You did that yourself, Eden said coldly. Every time you chose whiskey over your family. Every time you raised your hand in anger. Every time you made my mother cry herself to sleep. You did this, Pa. No one else. I'm still your father. No. Eden's voice rang out clear and strong across the cemetery. You stopped being my father the day you dragged me into that store and tried to trade me like livestock. You stopped being my father every time you hurt Mama. You're nothing to me now, nothing but a warning of what happens when a man lets bitterness and drink destroy everything good in his life. Caleb swayed on his feet, his mouth working but no sound coming out. He looked suddenly old and small and pathetic, a broken man who had broken everything he touched. You'll regret this, he finally spat. You'll come crawling back when that righteous bastard gets tired of you, when his precious children turn on you. And I won't be there. You hear me? You're dead to me, girl. Dead. Good, Eden said. Then we're finally even. She turned her back on him, a deliberate dismissal, and walked to the wagon. Gideon helped her up to the seat, his hand warm and steady. The children climbed into the back, Luke still bristling with protective fury, Eli and Sarah pressed close together. As they pulled away, Eden looked back once. Caleb stood alone among the graves, a solitary figure silhouetted against the gray sky. She felt nothing looking at him, no love, no hate, no regret, just emptiness where he used to be. Are you all right? Gideon asked quietly as they left Dry Hollow behind. No, Eden said honestly, but I will be. The ride back was subdued. The children dozed in the back, exhausted by emotion. Eden stared at the horizon and tried to process everything that had happened. Her mother's death, her father's final cruelty, Luke's fierce defense of her honor. He stood up for me, she said after a while. Luke, he stood up for me. Of course he did. Your family. I'm hired help. You're both. Gideon glanced at her. And maybe, over time, you'll be more the former than the latter, if you want to be. Eden didn't know how to respond to that. The offer of family, of belonging, it was too big, too overwhelming to think about right now when her heart was still raw with loss. They reached the homestead as evening shadows stretched long across the land. The children tumbled out of the wagon and disappeared into the house, giving the adults a moment of privacy. Thank you, Eden said as Gideon helped her down, for being there today, for bringing the children, for everything. You don't have to thank me for basic decency. Most people wouldn't consider it basic decency. Most people would have left me to handle it alone. I'm not most people. He stood close enough that she could smell the familiar scent of him, leather and pine and honest work. And you're not alone anymore, Eden. I need you to understand that. Whatever happens, wherever you go from here, you have people who care about you, who'll stand with you. The tears came again, but they were different this time. Not the hollow grief of loss, but something warmer, something that felt almost like gratitude. Gideon pulled her into a careful embrace, and Eden let herself lean into his strength for just a moment, let herself be held and comforted. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered against his chest. "How to grieve her and be grateful for this new life all at the same time. It feels wrong to be happy when she just died." "Your mother wanted you to be happy. That's not wrong. That's honoring her memory." He pulled back enough to look at her face. "Grief doesn't mean you stop living, Eden. It means you carry someone with you while you keep moving forward." She nodded, wiping at her eyes. "I should go help with supper." "The children can manage tonight. You should rest." But Eden shook her head. "I need to do something normal, something that makes sense. Please." He understood. He let her go, and she walked into the house to find Sarah setting the table with careful concentration, Eli stoking the fire in the stove, and Luke hauling in fresh water without being asked. They all looked up when she entered, their faces anxious and hopeful. "What should we make?" Sarah asked. "Something good?" Eden looked at these children who had defended her, mourned with her, stood by her. Her throat tightened with emotion. "Something good," she agreed. "Let's make something really good." They cooked together that evening, all of them working in the warm kitchen, bumping into each other and laughing at small mistakes. Luke told a story about the time he'd tried to make biscuits and created something that had the texture of rocks. Eli admitted he'd once started a small fire trying to surprise his mother with breakfast in bed. Sarah demonstrated her unique method of cracking eggs, which involved more shell in the bowl than Eden would have preferred but was executed with such enthusiasm that no one had the heart to correct her. And slowly, imperceptibly, the grief began to transform into something else. Not gone. It would never be gone completely, but integrated, woven into the fabric of this new life she was building. After supper, after the dishes were washed and the children were tucked in bed, Eden stood at her window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere up there she chose to believe her mother was watching, smiling, maybe, at the life Eden was creating from the ashes of the old one. "I did it, Mama," she whispered to the night. "I got away. I'm building something good. Just like you wanted." The stars offered no answer, but Eden didn't need one. She knew her mother would be proud. The days that followed developed a rhythm that was both familiar and strange. Eden threw herself into work with renewed determination, as if by staying busy she could outrun the grief that nipped at her heels. She rose before dawn and worked until well after dark, cleaning and cooking and tending to every corner of the homestead with fierce attention. The children responded by orbiting closer. Sarah became her shadow, following her from room to room with questions and observations and small gifts, wildflowers picked from the meadow, smooth stones found by the creek, drawings executed in shaky pencil on scraps of paper. Eli began reading aloud to her in the evenings, his voice gaining confidence as he worked through the books from his mother's shelf. And Luke started talking to her. Really talking, not just the grudging responses he'd offered before. It happened one afternoon when Eden was in the garden, harvesting the last of the season's vegetables before the first frost came. Luke appeared beside her with a bushel basket and knelt down to help without saying a word. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the late afternoon sun warm on their backs. "I meant what I said at the cemetery," Luke said finally, not looking up from the carrots he was pulling. "About you being part of the family." Eden's hand stilled on the tomato plant she'd been picking. "That was a brave thing you did, standing up to my father like that." "I was scared," he admitted. "He looked mean. But I was more scared of what might happen if nobody stood up for you, if he tried to take you away. He has no power over me anymore." "Good." Luke sat back on his heels, dirt streaking his face. "I was angry when you first came here. I thought you were trying to replace my mother. I know. But you're not. You're just you." He struggled with the words, his young face serious. "Mama was soft and gentle, and she sang all the time. You're different. You're tougher, I think. Like you've been through hard things and came out stronger. I don't feel very strong. That's how I know you are. Strong people never think they're strong." He pulled another carrot and added it to the basket. "Papa's different since you came. He smiles more, and Sarah stopped crying herself to sleep every night. And Eli, he talks now, did you notice?
He barely said 10 words for months after Mama died, but now he talks to you about everything. Maybe he just needed time. Maybe he needed someone who would listen. Luke looked at her directly for the first time. I'm glad you're here, Miss Eden. I'm sorry I made it hard at first. Eden felt tears prick her eyes, again, always crying these days, and reached over to squeeze his shoulder. You were protecting your family. There's nothing to apologize for. They finished the harvest together as the sun began its descent, and when they walked back to the house with arms full of vegetables, Eden felt something shift in her chest, a settling, like a foundation finding solid ground. That night, 2 weeks after the burial, Eden was sitting at the kitchen table mending one of Gideon's shirts when he came in from his final check of the livestock. The children were asleep upstairs, and the house was quiet except for the crackling of the fire and the whisper of thread through fabric. You don't have to do that, he said, nodding at the shirt. That old thing's about worn out anyway. It's got plenty of life left if the seams are reinforced. Eden bit off the thread and held up the shirt to examine her work. Besides, it's good fabric. No sense wasting it. Gideon poured himself coffee from the pot that was always warming on the stove and sat down across from her. He looked tired, the kind of bone-deep tired that came from endless physical labor. Eden noticed the new lines around his eyes, the silver threading more thickly through his dark hair. How are you doing? He asked. Really doing, not just the polite answer you give the children. Eden set down the shirt and considered the question. I'm sad and angry and relieved, which makes me feel guilty, and grateful, which makes me feel like I'm betraying my mother's memory by being happy when she just died. That's a lot to carry. Yes, but I'm managing. She traced the wood grain of the table with one finger. My mother once told me that grief is love with nowhere to go, so I'm trying to redirect it, put it into caring for your children, tending this house, building something that would make her proud. I think she'd be very proud. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping coffee and listening to the night sounds outside. Coyotes calling in the distance, the wind moving through the cottonwoods, an owl hunting somewhere nearby. The Dry Hollow Fall Fair is in 3 weeks, Gideon said eventually. I usually take the children. It's not much, just some livestock competitions, contests for best preserves and such, a dance in the evening, but the children enjoy it. That sounds nice. I was thinking, if you wanted to enter something in the baking competition, I'd cover the entry fee. You make the best biscuits I've ever tasted, and that includes Catherine's, though don't tell her I said that. He smiled slightly. Wherever she is, she'd probably agree with me. Eden felt warmth spread through her chest. You think my biscuits are that good? I think you could win the whole competition, and I think it might be good for you to do something for yourself instead of always working for everyone else. I'll think about it. Good. And Eden? He caught her eye across the table. I want you to know that you're more than hired help around here. I hope you know that by now. He paused, searching for words. You're important to us. All of us. Before Eden could respond, before she could process the implications of what he was saying, Sarah's voice drifted down from upstairs. Papa? Miss Eden? I had a bad dream. The moment broke. Gideon stood, but Eden waved him back down. I'll go. Finish your coffee. She climbed the stairs and found Sarah sitting up in bed, her blonde hair wild around her face, eyes wide and frightened in the lamplight Eden had brought. What did you dream about, sweetheart? That Mama came back, but she didn't know who I was anymore. She looked right at me and didn't remember me. Sarah's voice cracked. Do you think that happens? When people die and go to heaven, do they forget about us? Eden sat on the edge of the bed and pulled the little girl into her lap. No, honey. I don't think they forget. I think they remember everything, all the love, all the good times, all the reasons they held on as long as they could. How do you know? Because my mama just died too, remember? And I have to believe she still knows me, still loves me, still watches over me. Otherwise it would hurt too much. Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then she said, Are you going to leave us too? What? No, sweetheart. Everyone leaves. Mama left and baby Jacob left, and even Miss Thompson, who used to bring us food after Mama died, she left too. Everyone always leaves. Eden's heart broke for this child who had learned too young that nothing was permanent, that love didn't guarantee presence. She cupped Sarah's small face in her hands and looked into those worried blue eyes. Listen to me carefully. I'm not going anywhere. Not unless your papa tells me to leave, and even then I'd probably argue with him about it. That got a small smile. I'm here, Sarah. I'm here and I care about you and your brothers and your papa. Do you understand? Promise? I promise.
Sarah studied her face for a long moment, then nodded and burrowed into Eden's embrace. Can you stay until I fall back asleep? Of course. Eden held the little girl and hummed softly, an old lullaby her own mother used to sing. Sarah's breathing gradually slowed and deepened, her small body going heavy and warm with sleep. But even after she was clearly unconscious, Eden stayed watching her peaceful face and marveling at the trust this child had placed in her. When she finally crept back downstairs, she found Gideon still at the table, though the coffee cup was empty now. Everything all right? He asked. She had a nightmare about her mother not remembering her. Pain flashed across his face. She's been having those since Catherine died. I don't know how to fix it. You can't fix grief. You can only walk through it. Eden sat down across from him again. But maybe having more people around who love her helps. Gives her more anchors to hold on to. Is that what you are? An anchor? Eden met his eyes and saw something in them that made her breath catch. Something warm and complicated and frightening in its intensity. I'm trying to be, for all of you. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Then Gideon stood, breaking the spell. It's late. You should get some rest. He paused in the doorway. Thank you, Eden, for everything you do, for being exactly what we needed, even when we didn't know we needed it. After he left, Eden sat alone in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the dying fire and thinking about anchors and belonging and the strange, terrifying, wonderful way her life had transformed in just over a month. She'd come here as a girl who'd been traded for flour, who'd believed she was worthless. But somehow, in this house with these people, she was becoming someone else. Someone who mattered. Someone who was chosen. And that was worth more than all the flour in Wyoming. PQ Part 4 lưu ý. Viết 60.600 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện và hối thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ. Phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang Document Part 1. The morning of the dry hollow fall. Fair dawned crisp and clear, with frost painting the grass silver and the sky that particular shade of blue that only came in October. Eden had been awake for hours, her stomach tied in knots, despite telling herself it was just a county fair, just a baking competition, nothing to be nervous about. But it felt like more than that. It felt like stepping out into the world as someone new. Not Caleb Marlowe's worthless daughter, but Eden, the woman who made the best biscuits Gideon Rhodes had ever tasted, the woman who belonged somewhere. She'd made 36 biscuits the night before, working by lamplight after the children went to bed. Her hands had known exactly what to do, the precise amount of lard to cut into the flour, the careful folding of the dough, the perfect temperature of the oven. These were biscuits her mother had taught her to make back when they still had a real kitchen, a real home, before everything had fallen apart. For you, Mama, she'd whispered as she'd pulled the golden rounds from the oven. This is for you. Now as the household stirred to life, Eden packed the biscuits carefully into a basket lined with clean cloth. Sarah appeared at her elbow, already dressed in her Sunday best, a blue calico dress that brought out her eyes. Are you nervous? The little girl asked, bouncing on her toes with excitement. A little, Eden admitted. Don't be. Your biscuits are the best in the whole world. Better than Mrs. Hewitt's, and better than Mrs. Miller's, and definitely better than Mrs. Crane's, because Thomas said his mama's biscuits taste like sawdust. Sarah! Eden tried to sound stern but couldn't quite manage it. That's not a kind thing to say.
But it's true. Thomas said so himself. Eli came down the stairs, buttoning his good shirt, his sandy hair slicked down with water. Papa says the wagon's ready whenever you are, and Luke's already outside because he wants to see the livestock competitions. Of course he did. Luke had been talking about nothing but the horse racing for days, convinced that their neighbor's stallion would take first prize. He'd been in an unusually good mood all week, his natural competitiveness fired up by the prospect of the fair.
Gideon appeared in his doorway, and Eden's breath caught slightly. He'd dressed in his best clothes, dark trousers, a clean white shirt, a vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. His dark hair was still damp from washing, and he'd shaved, revealing the strong line of his jaw. He looked like a different man from the work-worn rancher she saw every day, dignified, almost handsome in a rugged way that made her heart do strange things. "Ready?" he asked, his gray eyes meeting hers. "As I'll ever be." The ride into Dry Hollow was festive despite Eden's nerves. The children chattered excitedly about the competitions and contests, the games and the food vendors. Sarah wanted to see the quilts. Eli was interested in the horseshoe throwing contest, and Luke had his heart set on watching every minute of the livestock judging. As they crested the hill overlooking town, Eden could see the fairgrounds already bustling with activity. Tents and booths had been set up in the field beside the church, colorful bunting strung between posts, smoke rising from food stalls. Wagons and horses crowded the makeshift parking area, and people milled about in their finest clothes. Farmers and ranchers, townspeople, and distant neighbors, all gathered for this annual celebration. Eden's stomach tightened. These were the same people who'd stood silent while her father tried to sell her. The same people who'd watched her humiliation and done nothing until Gideon had stepped in. "Hey." Gideon's voice was quiet, meant only for her. "You belong here as much as anyone, more than most. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." She nodded, grateful for his steadiness, and straightened her spine. She was Eden Rhodes. No, not Rhodes. She wasn't family. She was Eden Marlowe, but different from the girl who'd knelt on that store floor. She was the woman who'd buried her mother with dignity, who'd stood up to her father, who'd made a place for herself through honest work and genuine care. She could do this. Gideon found a spot to leave the wagon, and they all climbed down. Immediately, Sarah grabbed Eden's hand while the boys flanked their father. Together, they walked toward the fairgrounds, drawing looks and whispers as they passed. Eden heard the murmurs. "That's the Marlowe girl, and living with Rhodes now, and wonder what kind of arrangement they have." She kept her chin up and her eyes forward, refusing to show how the gossip stung. The baking competition tent was near the center of the fairgrounds, already crowded with women arranging their entries on long tables. Eden recognized Mrs. Hewitt, who gave her a small, almost apologetic smile. Mrs. Miller was there with her famous apple pie. The pastor's wife had brought an elaborate cake decorated with candied violets. And there, holding court near the judge's table, was Clara Morrison, the mayor's wife, Dry Hollow's self-appointed social queen, and a woman who'd made it clear she thought Eden was exactly what Caleb Marlowe had called her: worthless. "Well, well," Clara said loudly as Eden approached with her basket. "Look who decided to enter the competition. Tell me, dear, are these biscuits made with charity flour, or did you actually purchase the ingredients yourself?" The tent went quiet. Every woman there turned to watch, waiting to see how Eden would respond. Before Eden could speak, a new voice cut through the tension. "Mrs. Morrison, I do believe those are the same ingredients we all use: flour, lard, salt, and skill. Though I suppose the last one might be in shorter supply for some of us than others." Mrs. Hewitt had stepped forward, her weathered face set with unexpected steel. "Now, are you going to let the girl enter her biscuits in peace? Or do I need to remind everyone that you won last year with a recipe you got from that traveling salesman's wife? The one from Denver who definitely did all the actual baking?" Clara's face flushed red. "I don't know what you're—" "Course you don't. Just like you don't know how Eden Marlowe has turned the Rhodes household from a disaster into a proper home. Just like you don't know that she tends a garden and raises those children like they're her own and never complains or puts on airs." Mrs. Hewitt crossed her arms. "Some of us notice real quality when we see it, Clara, even if it comes in simple packaging." Other women began nodding, murmuring agreement. The pastor's wife moved to stand beside Mrs. Hewitt.
Even Mrs. Miller, whose son Thomas had defended Eden in the store that day, stepped closer. Clara looked around at the shifted allegiances and seemed to realize she'd miscalculated. "Well,
I was only making conversation." She sniffed and turned away, but the damage to her authority was done.
Eden set her basket on the table with shaking hands. Mrs. Hewitt came over and patted her shoulder. "Don't you mind her, dear. She's been needing someone to take her down a peg for years. Your biscuits look beautiful." She lowered her voice. "Between you and me, I think you've got a real chance at winning. And wouldn't that just burn Clara's biscuits?" Despite everything, Eden felt herself smile. "Thank you for standing up for me. Should have done it sooner. Should have done it that day in Tully's store. I'm ashamed it took me this long to find my courage." Mrs. Hewitt squeezed her hand. "But I'm finding it now. We all are. You've shown us what real strength looks like, girl. Time we returned the favor." The judging wouldn't happen until afternoon, so Eden left her entry and went to find Gideon and the children.
She found them at the livestock pens, where Luke was practically vibrating with excitement over the horses while Eli studiously examined the cattle and Sarah tried to pet every animal within reach. "How'd it go?" Gideon asked, scanning her face for distress. "Clara Morrison tried to humiliate me. Mrs. Hewitt defended me instead." Eden shook her head, still processing it. "Other women, too. They stood up for me." "Of course they did. You've earned their respect. I've barely been here 2 months." "Respect isn't about time. It's about character." He touched her elbow gently, steering her toward a food stall. "Come on, let's get something to eat before the competitions start. The children have been eyeing those meat pies since we arrived." They bought food and found a spot in the shade to eat. Meat pies and apple cider, fresh bread, and cheese. The children ate with the single-minded focus of the perpetually hungry, and Eden found herself relaxing slightly. This wasn't so bad. The fare was actually pleasant when you weren't worried about public humiliation. After lunch, they split up. Luke went with his father to watch the horse competitions. Eli wanted to see the horseshoe tournament. Sarah dragged Eden toward the craft displays, chattering about all the beautiful quilts and preserves and needlework. They were admiring a particularly intricate quilt when Eden heard a familiar snide voice behind her. "Quite the domestic arrangement you've got there, playing house with a widower and his children." Eden turned to find Martha Kincaid, Clara Morrison's closest friend and second in command of Dry Hollow's Gossip Brigade. She stood with 2 other women, all 3 of them wearing expressions of false concern that barely masked their malice. "It's not an arrangement," Eden said evenly. "It's employment. I work for Mr. Rhodes as a housekeeper." "Is that what you call it?" Martha's smile was sharp as a knife. "Seems convenient, doesn't it? Pretty young woman moves in with a lonely widower. Everyone knows what that leads to." "It leads to clean floors and fed children," Eden replied, keeping her voice level despite the anger building in her chest. "But I suppose that's hard to understand for women who've never had to work for their bread." Martha's eyes narrowed. "Careful, girl. You might have fooled some people into thinking you're respectable, but we all know the truth. Your father sold you like a—" "My father tried to," Eden interrupted, her voice going cold and hard. "And Mr. Rhodes stopped him. He gave me a choice and a chance, which is more than you've ever given anyone who wasn't born into your precious social circle." She felt Sarah's hand tighten around hers, felt the little girl pressing close. Eden took a breath and softened her tone, aware that children were watching, listening, learning how to face cruelty with grace. "Now, if you'll excuse us, Sarah and I are going to look at the quilts. We're not interested in participating in whatever game you're playing." She turned to walk away, but Martha wasn't finished. "Everyone's talking about it, you know, wondering when the widower's going to make an honest woman of you. Or if he even needs to, given that you're already living under his roof like a—" "That's enough." The voice came from behind them, and Eden turned to see Thomas Crane standing there, no longer the awkward young man from the store, but someone older, harder, fed up with watching cruelty go unchecked. Several other young people stood with him, including the Miller brothers and a few others Eden recognized from church. "You don't get to talk to her like that," Thomas continued, stepping forward. "Miss Eden's done more good in 2 months than you've done in your whole life, Mrs. Kincaid. She's raising those Rhodes children with more love and patience than most natural mothers show. She's earned her place through hard work and genuine care. What have you earned except a reputation for cruelty?" Martha sputtered,
her face going red. How dare you speak to me that way? The same way you speak to others, apparently. Thomas looked at Eden. Don't let them chase you off, Miss Eden. Most folks around here are glad you're at the Rhodes place. We've seen the difference you've made. Other voices chimed in, agreement, support, validation. Eden felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give Martha and her friends the satisfaction. Thank you, she said to Thomas and the others. Then she took Sarah's hand and walked away with her head high, leaving the gossips to stew in their own venom. Those were mean ladies, Sarah whispered once they were out of earshot. Yes, they were. Why were they being mean to you? Eden considered how to explain it in terms a 5-year-old could understand. Some people feel better about themselves by making others feel small. It's not about me, really. It's about them being unhappy. Are you unhappy? Eden looked down at this little girl who'd lost her mother but was learning to trust again, who brought her drawings and asked her to braid her hair and believed Eden would keep her promises. She thought about Luke standing up to her father at the cemetery, about Eli reading to her in the evenings, about Gideon's steady presence and quiet respect. No, sweetheart, I'm not unhappy at all. The afternoon wore on. They watched the horseshoe competition. Eli came in 3rd place and beamed with pride. They saw Luke's favorite horse take 2nd in the racing competition, which he declared was robbery because that stallion was clearly faster than the winner. They ate too much candy from the vendors and watched a juggler perform tricks that made Sarah shriek with delight. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, the announcement came that the baking competition winners would be revealed. Eden's stomach clenched with nerves as they made their way back to the competition tent. A small crowd had gathered, and the judges, 3 men from a neighboring county, brought in to ensure fairness, stood at the front with ribbons in hand. Gideon appeared at Eden's side, somehow sensing she needed support. Win or lose, you should be proud, he murmured. You put yourself out there. That takes courage. The head judge cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, we've had the pleasure of sampling some truly excellent baking today. Every entry showed skill and care, but there can only be one winner in each category. He went through the other categories first. Best pie went to Mrs. Miller, best cake to the pastor's wife, best preserves to a woman Eden didn't know from a ranch 20 miles north. Each winner received polite applause and a ribbon. And now for the best biscuits. The judge smiled. This was perhaps our hardest decision. We had many fine entries, but one stood out for its perfect texture, golden color, and flavor that reminded all 3 of us of our mother's kitchens. The first place ribbon for best biscuits goes to Miss Eden Marlowe. For a moment, Eden couldn't process the words. She just stood there, frozen, while Gideon gave her a gentle push forward. Then Sarah was squealing and jumping up and down, and Eli was clapping enthusiastically, and Luke was grinning like he'd won the competition himself. Eden walked forward on shaking legs to accept the blue ribbon. The judge shook her hand warmly. Outstanding work, miss. Best biscuits I've had in years. You should be very proud. Thank you, she managed, her voice barely working. Thank you so much. The crowd applauded, genuine warm applause. Mrs. Hewitt was beaming. The pastor's wife nodded approval. Even some of the younger women were smiling, pleased to see someone new win instead of the usual suspects. And there, at the back of the crowd, Clara Morrison stood with her mouth pressed into a thin line of displeasure, while Martha Kincaid looked like she'd bitten into something sour. Eden didn't gloat. She just accepted her ribbon with grace and walked back to where Gideon and the children waited. Sarah crashed into her with a hug that nearly knocked her over. You won! You won! I knew you would! We all knew, Eli added, his shy smile warm. Luke just nodded, trying to look nonchalant but failing to hide his pride. Good job, Miss Eden. And Gideon looked at her with something in his eyes that made her heart race. Pride, yes, but something else too. Something deeper and more complicated that she wasn't ready to name. Told you, was all he said. But the way he said it felt like so much more. The evening dance was held in the largest barn in Dry Hollow, with hay bales pushed to the sides and lanterns strung from the rafters. A small band, fiddle, guitar, and harmonica, played lively tunes that had people clapping and stomping their feet. The children ran wild with the other youngsters, burning off the energy they'd accumulated throughout the day. Eden stood near the wall, her blue ribbon pinned to her dress, watching the dancers spin and laugh. She'd never been to a dance before. Her father had considered such things frivolous, and even if he hadn't, no one would have invited Caleb Marlowe's daughter to participate. "You should dance," Mrs. Hewitt said, appearing beside her with cups of punch. "You've earned the right to celebrate. I don't know how. It's not complicated. You just move your feet and try not to step on your partner too much." She winked. "And I happen to know Gideon Rhodes is a fine dancer. His Catherine taught him back when they were courting." Eden's cheeks flushed. "Oh, I couldn't." "Why not? You're young. You've just won a competition, and there's music playing. Seems like the perfect time to learn something new." Before Eden could protest further, Gideon appeared as if summoned. He'd removed his vest at some point during the day, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up to his elbows. There was a lightness about him she rarely saw, the weight of daily responsibility temporarily lifted. "Would you like to dance?" he asked, extending his hand. Eden's heart hammered. "I don't know how." "Then I'll teach you, if you trust me." Did she trust him? She looked at this man who'd bought her freedom, who'd given her a home, who'd stood beside her at her mother's grave and defended her honor without being asked. This man whose children had become like family, whose presence made her feel both safe and dangerously hopeful. "Yes," she said, placing her hand in his. "I trust you." He led her onto the makeshift dance floor as the band struck up a waltz. His hand found the small of her back, warm and steady, while his other hand held hers with careful respect. They were closer than they'd ever been, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, could smell the clean scent of soap and sun on his skin. "Just follow my lead," he said softly. "Don't think too hard about it. Just feel the music and move with me." It was awkward at first. Eden stepped on his feet twice and apologized profusely, but Gideon just smiled and patiently corrected her movements. Gradually, she began to understand the rhythm, the way his body telegraphed which direction they'd turn. The dance floor wasn't crowded, and he kept them in a small area where she wouldn't collide with other couples. "There," he said after a minute. "You're getting it. I'm trying not to cripple you. You're doing fine. Better than fine." He spun her carefully, and Eden felt something loosen in her chest, something she'd been holding tight for so long she'd forgotten it was there. Joy, maybe, or possibility. They danced through one song, then another. Other couples smiled at them as they passed. The children waved from the sidelines where they were sharing cookies with friends. And Eden, for the first time in her life, felt like she belonged to something bigger than survival. She belonged to this moment, this music, this community that was slowly accepting her as one of their own. When the music finally slowed for a more intimate dance, the kind meant for courting couples, Eden expected Gideon to release her, to step back and maintain the appropriate distance between employer and employee. Instead, he pulled her slightly closer and lowered his voice so only she could hear. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to answer honestly." Eden's breath caught. "All right. Are you happy here? At the ranch? With me and the children? Is this what you want? Or are you just staying because you feel like you have no other choice?" The question caught her off guard. She looked up at him, at the vulnerability in his eyes, and realized this strong, steady man was afraid of her answer. "I'm happy," she said truthfully. "Happier than I've been in years. Maybe ever. The children, they've become so important to me. And you," she faltered, not sure how much to reveal. "You've given me more than just employment. You've given me dignity, a place to belong. I don't stay because I have no choice. I stay because I can't imagine being anywhere else." Something shifted in Gideon's expression. His hand at her back pressed slightly firmer, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Good. Because I don't want you anywhere else either. These past months, watching you transform our house into a home, watching my children smile again, watching you become part of our family." He paused, seeming to wrestle with words. "Catherine's been gone 8 months, and I loved her with everything I had. I'll always love her. But life goes on, and people change, and sometimes you meet someone who makes you remember that your heart's still capable of feeling things you thought were dead." Eden's pulse raced. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? I'm not asking for anything right now, Gideon continued quickly. I know it's too soon for both of us. You're still grieving your mother, and I'm still finding my way without Catherine. But I wanted you to know... He took a breath. I'd like permission to court you, properly, with intention, not now, but soon, when enough time has passed that it's respectful to everyone's memory. The music swelled around them, and Eden felt tears gather in her eyes for what must have been the 100th time that day. But these were different tears, tears of hope, of possibility, of a future she'd never dared imagine. You want to court me? She whispered. Only if you want to be courted. Only if the idea doesn't repel you. Repel me? Eden laughed, a sound that was half sob. Gideon, She struggled to find words adequate for what she felt. I've never been chosen before. Not really. My father didn't choose me. I was just born to him. My mother loved me, but she was dying and had no choice but to send me away. But you're choosing me, deliberately, even though you could have anyone. I don't want anyone else. His gray eyes held hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. I want the woman who makes my children laugh, who tends my house like it matters, who won a baking competition and looked surprised that anyone thought she was talented. I want the woman who stood up to her drunken father at a cemetery and told him he'd lost all claim to her. I want you, Eden, if you'll have me. The song ended. Other couples began leaving the floor, but Gideon and Eden stood still, caught in this moment of confession and connection. Ask me again, Eden said softly. In a few months, when the grief isn't so fresh. Ask me again, and I'll say yes. Gideon smiled, a real, full smile that transformed his usually serious face. I'll ask, and you'd better keep that promise. I will. She squeezed his hand. I promise. They stepped apart, finally observing the proprieties, but something had fundamentally changed between them. A line had been crossed, a future had been acknowledged. They were no longer just employer and employee, no longer just two damaged people sharing space. They were something new, something growing, something that felt like the beginning of real belonging. The ride home was quiet but comfortable. The children dozed in the back of the wagon, exhausted from the day's excitement. Eden sat beside Gideon on the bench, her blue ribbon still pinned to her dress, her hand resting on the seat between them, where his pinky finger occasionally brushed against hers. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the night air carried the scent of hay and distant pine. Somewhere in the darkness, coyotes called to each other, and an owl hunted silently through the trees. Thank you, Eden said softly. For today, for the competition, for the dancing, for... She paused. For everything. You earned it all yourself. I just drove the wagon. You did more than that. You gave me courage to be seen, to step out and claim something for myself instead of just surviving. You've always had that courage. You just needed the opportunity to use it. They lapsed into companionable silence, and Eden found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her here. From that humiliating morning in Tully's general store to this moment of connection and hope. She'd been traded like grain, dismissed as worthless, but she'd walked out of that store and into a life where she mattered. Her mother had told her to live, to be happy, to know her worth. And she was doing exactly that. The homestead appeared in the distance, dark except for the lamp they'd left burning in the kitchen window. Home. When had she started thinking of it that way? When had this weathered house and the people inside it become the center of her world? Gideon pulled the wagon to a stop and helped the sleepy children down. Luke was steady enough to walk on his own, but Eli was practically unconscious. Gideon scooped him up easily while Eden took Sarah's hand. Come on, sweetheart, let's get you to bed. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming. Eden tucked Sarah in while Gideon handled the boys, and when she came back downstairs, she found him in the kitchen making tea. Thought you might want some before bed, he said, handing her a cup. They sat at the table together, just as they had countless times before. But everything felt different now, charged with possibility, weighted with promise. My mother would have liked you, Eden said suddenly. She would have approved. Of me courting you? Of you, period. She wanted me somewhere safe with someone good. And you, Eden smiled. You're the best man I've ever known. Gideon's cheeks colored slightly. I'm just a rancher trying to raise his children right. You're more than that. And I think you know it. She finished her tea and stood. I should get to bed. Tomorrow comes early. Eden. He caught her hand as she passed. I meant what I said tonight. Every word. I know. I meant what I said too. She squeezed his fingers. Good night, Gideon. Good night. She went to her room and changed into her nightgown, then sat on the edge of her bed with the blue ribbon in her hands. First place. Best biscuits. Chosen. Worth. She'd learned her worth wasn't measured in sacks of flour or her father's opinion or the gossip of small-minded women. Her worth was in the love she gave and received, in the work of her hands, in the family she was building from the ruins of the old. Eden pinned the blue ribbon to the wall above her bed where she'd see it every morning. A reminder of the day she'd stepped into her future, the day she'd let herself believe she deserved good things. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the cottonwoods, and somewhere in the darkness, an owl called, a sound that was both lonely and beautiful, like everything in this harsh, wonderful land. Eden lay down and closed her eyes, and for the first time in years she fell asleep without fear, without grief, without doubt. She fell asleep knowing she was exactly where she belonged. PQ Part 5 Louis Việc sao khăn trăm mùa shades sau son 100 to liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện và hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ. Phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, phần 5 giải quyết hết vấn đề và kết thúc trọn vẹn câu chuyện. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document Part 5. Winter came to Wyoming with a vengeance that year, arriving early and settling in like it intended to stay forever. By late November, snow covered the ground in a thick white blanket that transformed the landscape into something both beautiful and treacherous. The cattle huddled near the barn, seeking shelter from the bitter wind, and ice formed thick along the creek bed. Inside the Rhodes homestead, though, life had never felt warmer. Eden stood at the kitchen window, watching snowflakes drift past while bread dough rose on the counter behind her. 4 months had passed since the fall fair. 4 months since Gideon had asked permission to court her when enough time had passed. They'd settled into a rhythm that felt both comfortable and charged with anticipation. Stolen glances across the dinner table, hands brushing when they both reached for the same dish, conversations that stretched late into the night after the children were asleep. He hadn't formally begun courting her yet. They were still observing the proper mourning period for Catherine, still allowing the children time to adjust to the idea of their father's heart opening again. But everyone in the household knew something was building, something inevitable and right. Miss Eden? Eli's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He stood in the doorway with a book clutched to his chest, his expression uncertain. Can I ask you something? Of course, sweetheart, what is it? If Papa marries you and Luke says he's going to, he heard Papa talking to Mr. Tully about it, would you be our new mama? Eden's heart clenched. She moved away from the window and knelt down so she was eye level with the 8-year-old. Come here. Eli crossed the room and stood in front of her, his sandy hair falling into his eyes. Eden brushed it back gently. Your mama was Catherine, she said softly. She gave birth to you and loved you and raised you for 8 years. Nothing and no one can ever replace her or change the fact that she's your mama. Do you understand that? Eli nodded, but his eyes were troubled. But she's gone. Yes, and that's heartbreaking and unfair, and I'm so sorry you lost her, but her being gone doesn't mean she stops being your mama. She's still in your heart, in your memories, in all the things she taught you. Then what would you be, if you and Papa got married? Eden considered the question carefully. I'd be someone who loves you very much, someone who takes care of you and wants the best for you. Maybe I'd be like a second mama. Someone who gets to help raise you alongside the memory of your first mama. Can you have two mamas? I think if you're very lucky, yes. I think love is big enough for that. Eli processed this in the serious way he processed everything. Then he threw his arms around Eden's neck and hugged her tight. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad Papa picked you. I'm glad too, Eden whispered, holding him close. I'm very glad. That evening, after supper was cleared and the dishes washed, Gideon found Eden in what had become her schoolroom, the small parlor where she taught the children their lessons each afternoon. She was organizing books on the shelf, her back to the door, humming that same tuneless melody Sarah always hummed. You've taught her that song, Gideon observed from the doorway. Eden turned, startled. I didn't hear you come in. You were concentrating. He stepped into the room, his presence filling the small space. Eli told me about your conversation today, about mamas and marriage. I hope I said the right thing. I didn't want him to think I was trying to replace Catherine. You said exactly the right thing. You always do. Gideon moved closer, and Eden's pulse quickened. It's been nearly 9 months since Catherine passed. I've been thinking. A crash from upstairs interrupted him, followed by Sarah's shriek and Luke's shout of, It wasn't my fault. Gideon sighed. I should go see what they've destroyed now. I'll come with you. They climbed the stairs together to find that Luke and Sarah had been playing some elaborate game involving Sarah's dolls and Luke's attempt to build them a house out of books, which had collapsed spectacularly, sending volumes skittering across the floor. She said it needed to be taller, Luke protested. You said you could make it taller, Sarah countered, hands on her hips. Both of you clean this up, Gideon said, but there was amusement in his voice. And no more engineering projects after dark. Yes, Papa, they chorused. As Eden and Gideon headed back downstairs, she felt his hand briefly touch the small of her back, a gesture that was becoming familiar, intimate in its casualness. In the kitchen, she began preparing tea while he added wood to the fire. You were saying something before we were interrupted? Eden prompted. Gideon straightened from the fireplace and dusted off his hands. For a moment, he just looked at her, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight, and Eden saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Walk with me tomorrow? He asked. After breakfast, if the weather holds? Just the two of us. The children? Luke's old enough to watch them for an hour. I need to talk to you, Eden, really talk to you, away from little ears and daily distractions. She nodded, her heart hammering. All right, I'd like that. That night, Eden lay awake long after the house had gone silent, staring at the ceiling and wondering what tomorrow would bring. She knew what she hoped for, had known for months now, if she was honest with herself. But hope was a dangerous thing when you'd spent so many years learning not to hope at all. Morning dawned clear and cold, the sky that brilliant blue that only came after fresh snow. Eden dressed carefully in her best everyday dress and braided her hair with hands that trembled slightly. At breakfast, the children seemed to sense something momentous was approaching. Even Sarah was subdued, watching her father and Eden with wide, knowing eyes. After the meal was cleared, Gideon helped Eden into her warmest shawl and led her outside. The snow crunched under their feet as they walked away from the house, following a path toward the small rise that overlooked the property. Neither spoke at first, both of them just breathing the crisp air and finding their footing in the snow. When they reached the top of the rise, Gideon stopped and turned to face her. The homestead spread out below them, the house with smoke curling from its chimney, the barn solid and weatherproof, the cattle safe in their winter pasture. It looked like something from a painting, peaceful and permanent. When I first brought you here, Gideon began, his voice quiet but steady, I told you I needed help with the house and the children. That was true, but it was also only part of the truth. Eden waited, hardly breathing. The truth is, when I saw you kneeling on that floor in Tully's store, being treated like you were worth less than flour, something broke open inside me. I saw a woman who deserved so much better than what she was getting. A woman with strength and dignity that couldn't be traded away no matter what your father tried to do. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I told myself I was just doing the right thing, helping someone in need. But even then, I think I saw something in you that called to something in me. Gideon, let me finish, please. He took a breath. These past months, watching you with my children, watching you turn our house into a home again, Eden, you've given us back something I thought we'd lost forever. Not just clean floors and good food, though God knows we needed both. You gave us life again. Laughter, hope, a reason to look forward instead of just backward at what we'd lost.
His hands found hers, warm despite the cold, steady despite the emotion in his voice. Catherine was my first love, and I'll always cherish what we had. But she's gone, and I'm still here, still living. And I've learned that the heart's bigger than we think. It can hold grief and joy at the same time, can honor the past while choosing the future. His gray eyes held hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. I want to choose you, Eden, not because you're convenient or because the children need a mother figure. I want to choose you because you're you, because you're brave and kind and stronger than you know, because you make me laugh and challenge me and make me want to be better than I am. Eden felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. I know I'm not much of a catch, Gideon continued. I'm a widowed rancher with 3 children and a shoulder that acts up in cold weather. I'm set in my ways and not always good with words. But I promise you this. If you'll have me, I'll spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you know your worth. Making sure you never kneel on anyone's floor again. Making sure you're cherished and protected and valued exactly as you deserve. He released one of her hands and reached into his pocket, pulling out a simple gold band. It wasn't fancy, just a smooth circle of metal that caught the winter sunlight and gleamed warmly. This was my mother's ring. She gave it to me before she died and told me to give it to a woman worthy of wearing it. A woman with strength and character. He held the ring between them. Eden Marlowe, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life showing you that you're worth more than all the flour in Wyoming, more than gold or silver or anything else this world measures by? Eden couldn't speak past the tears clogging her throat. All she could do was nod frantically, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, she finally managed.
Yes, Gideon, yes. 1,000 times yes. His face broke into the widest smile she'd ever seen him wear. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for her, and then he pulled her into his arms and held her tight. Eden buried her face against his chest and let herself cry, let herself feel the overwhelming rush of joy and relief and gratitude that came with being chosen. Really, truly chosen. I love you, she whispered against his coat. I think I've loved you since that first day when you gave me back my dignity, when you made me stand up instead of kneel. I love you too, Gideon murmured into her hair. God, Eden, I love you so much. They stood there holding each other while the snow began to fall again, soft flakes drifting down around them like blessings. Finally, Gideon pulled back enough to look at her face. We should probably tell the children before they break something trying to watch us through the windows. Eden laughed, wiping at her tears. Do you think they'll be all right with this? I think they've been waiting for this since the day you braided Sarah's hair with those blue ribbons. He kissed her forehead gently. Come on, let's go tell them they're getting a new mother. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and before they even reached the door, it flew open. All 3 children tumbled out, not even bothering with coats, their faces alight with excitement and hope. Did you ask her? Sarah practically shrieked. Did she say yes? Did you see the ring? Eli added, craning to look at Eden's hand. Luke hung back slightly, trying to maintain his 12-year-old dignity, but his eyes were bright with emotion. So you're really going to marry her, Papa? Gideon pulled Eden close to his side. I really am, if that's all right with you children. All right? Sarah launched herself at Eden, wrapping her small arms around her waist. It's the best thing ever.
Now you can be our mama for real. Eli joined the embrace, and even Luke stepped forward to offer a handshake that turned into an awkward but genuine hug. Welcome to the family, he said gruffly. Officially. Eden held these children who had become hers and felt something settle deep in her chest. This was what her mother had wanted for her, this belonging, this love, this life built on choice rather than circumstance. That afternoon, while the children played in the snow and Gideon tended to ranch work, Eden sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter. It was addressed to no one, just words on paper that she needed to speak to the mother who would never read them. Dear Mama, you told me to live, and I'm living. You told me to be happy, and I'm happier than I ever imagined possible. You told me to know my worth, and I'm learning every day what it means to be valued. I'm going to marry Gideon Rhodes in the spring. He's a good man, Mama. The kind of man you always hoped I'd find, steady and honest and kind. He has 3 children who are teaching me what it means to be loved without conditions. Together, we're building something that feels like forever. I wish you could be here to see it, to walk me down the aisle or help me plan the ceremony, or just sit with me and tell me I'm doing the right thing. But I feel you with me anyway. In the way I braid Sarah's hair like you used to braid mine. In the recipes I cook that you taught me. In the strength I found when I needed it most. Strength you gave me by loving me, even when you had nothing else to give. Thank you, Mama, for everything. For fighting to stay alive long enough to see me safe. For sending me away, even though it must have broken your heart. For teaching me that worth isn't something other people give you. It's something you build yourself, one choice at a time. I'm building a good life, Mama. A life you'd be proud of. Rest peacefully. I've got it from here. Your daughter, Eden. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her Bible, pressed between the pages like a prayer. Then she stood and looked around the kitchen. This room that had been a disaster when she'd arrived, now warm and clean and full of life. Through the window, she could see the children building a snowman. Sarah was trying to lift a snowball bigger than her head while Eli carefully shaped the middle section and Luke worked on the base. Gideon stood nearby, offering advice and encouragement, his breath fogging in the cold air. Her family. This impossible, precious family that had formed from tragedy and chance and choice. The weeks that followed were a flurry of quiet preparation. Word spread through Dry Hollow about the engagement carried by visitors and trips to town. Most people were genuinely happy for them. Mrs. Hewitt hugged Eden and cried tears of joy. Thomas Crane congratulated Gideon on his good sense. Even the Miller brothers offered their best wishes. Of course, there were those who disapproved. Clara Morrison sniffed that it was unseemly for a widower to remarry so quickly, and Martha Kincaid muttered about opportunistic girls who trapped vulnerable men. But their voices grew quieter as more people rallied around Eden and Gideon's happiness. The pastor agreed to perform the ceremony in early April, when the worst of the winter would be past, but before the spring planting demanded all of Gideon's attention. They would marry in the church with the whole community invited, making it clear this was a real marriage, a public commitment, not something shameful to be hidden. Eden began work on her wedding dress with help from Mrs. Hewitt and the pastor's wife. It was simple but beautiful, cream-colored cotton with modest sleeves and a high neckline, embroidered with small flowers along the hem. She worked on it in the evenings while the children did their lessons, each stitch a meditation on the future she was sewing toward. Winter deepened and then began its slow retreat. By March, the snow had started melting in earnest, revealing the brown grass beneath and transforming the landscape into a muddy mess. But Eden found beauty even in the mud. It meant spring was coming, meant new life, meant her wedding day was approaching. One evening in late March, Eden was tucking Sarah into bed when the little girl asked, "Will you wear Mama's ring at the wedding?" Eden looked down at the gold band on her finger. "This ring?" "Yes, sweetheart. Your grandmother gave it to your papa to give to someone special." Mama wore a different ring, the one Papa gave her when they got married. It had a tiny diamond. Sarah's face was thoughtful. "He keeps it in the box in his room, with her other things." "That's right. Those are special memories of your mama that your papa will always treasure." "Do you think Mama would be happy about you and Papa getting married?" It was a question Eden had asked herself many times. "I think your mama loved your papa and you children more than anything. And I think if she could see how happy we are, how well you're all doing, she'd be glad. She wouldn't want your papa to be alone forever or for you children to grow up without someone to care for you." "That's what Eli says too. He says Mama would like you because you make Papa smile." Sarah snuggled deeper into her blankets. "I think she would like you. I think she'd say thank you for taking care of us." Eden kissed Sarah's forehead, her heart full. "Sleep well, sweetheart.
Dream good dreams. I will. I'm going to dream about the wedding, about you and your pretty dress, and Papa looking handsome, and all of us being a real family forever and ever. Forever and ever, Eden agreed softly. That sounds perfect. April arrived with unexpected warmth and the smell of earth waking up. Wildflowers began pushing through the dirt, adding splashes of color to the brown landscape. Birds returned from their winter migrations, filling the air with song. And in the garden behind the house, the vegetables Eden had planted the previous fall began sending up green shoots, promising abundance to come. The night before the wedding, Eden stood in her room looking at the dress hanging on the back of the door. Tomorrow she would put it on and walk down the aisle of the Dry Hollow Church. Tomorrow she would take Gideon's hand and speak vows that would bind them together for the rest of their lives. Tomorrow she would officially become Eden Rhodes, mother to 3 children who weren't hers by birth, but were completely hers by choice. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Luke entered, looking uncomfortable in his stocking feet. He'd grown even taller over the winter, and his voice had started cracking at odd moments. He was becoming a man, though he still had the awkward uncertainty of a boy. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked. "Of course. Sit down." He perched on the edge of her bed, picking at a loose thread on his sleeve. "I wanted to say, before tomorrow, before everything gets all official, I wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For not trying to make us forget Mama, for letting us talk about her and remember her and keep her in our family. A lot of people would have wanted us to just move on and pretend she never existed." Eden sat beside him, close but not touching, giving him space to find his words. "When she first died," Luke continued, his voice thick, "I was so angry. Angry at God for taking her, angry at Papa for not being able to save her, angry at the whole world. And when you came, I was angry at you too, even though you hadn't done anything wrong, because you were alive and she wasn't, and that didn't seem fair." "That's understandable." "But you didn't get mad at me for being angry. You just kept showing up, kept being patient, kept proving you weren't trying to replace her. And slowly I realized you weren't here to erase Mama. You were here to help us remember how to live again, how to be happy without feeling guilty about it." He looked at her with eyes so much like his father's. "You're not my mother. You're never going to be my mother. But you're something else, something important. And I'm glad Papa chose you. I'm glad you're going to be part of our family, officially." Eden felt tears gathering but blinked them back. Luke was offering her something precious, his acceptance, his approval, his own form of love. She wouldn't diminish it by crying. "Thank you, Luke. That means more to me than you know." He stood abruptly, embarrassed by the emotion of the moment. "Well, I just wanted to say that, before the wedding. So you know." "I know, and I promise you, I'll always honor your mother's memory. I'll always make sure you and Eli and Sarah know about her, remember her, keep her alive in your hearts. That's part of how I'll love you all, by loving the woman who loved you first." Luke nodded, not trusting his voice, and hurried from the room. Eden sat in the silence that followed, thinking about the complicated beauty of blended families, of honoring the past while building the future, of love that expanded to make room for everyone who needed it. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, with a breeze that carried the scent of spring flowers and new grass. Eden woke early and lay in bed for a moment, savoring the quiet and thinking about all the mornings she'd woken in this room, mornings of uncertainty and grief and gradual healing. This would be her last morning waking as a single woman, her last morning as just hired help instead of wife and mother. Mrs. Hewitt and the pastor's wife arrived mid-morning to help Eden prepare. They styled her hair into an elegant twist with small white flowers tucked into the braids. They helped her into her dress and adjusted the fit until everything hung perfectly. When Eden finally looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked happy. She looked loved. She looked like someone who knew her own worth. "Your mother would be so proud," Mrs. Hewitt said softly, dabbing at her eyes. "I wish she could have seen you like this." "She can," Eden replied with certainty. "Wherever she is, she can see. And she's smiling." The church was packed when they arrived. It seemed like everyone from Dry Hollow and the surrounding ranches had come.
drawn by genuine affection for the couple and probably also by curiosity about the young woman who'd gone from being sold for flour to marrying one of the most respected ranchers in the territory. Eden waited in the small room at the back of the church while the guests settled. Through the door, she could hear the murmur of conversation, the occasional laugh, the rustle of people finding their seats. Her heart hammered with nerves and excitement. Sarah appeared in the doorway, looking like a little angel in her blue dress with flowers in her blonde hair. "Papa says it's time. Are you ready?" Eden took a deep breath and looked at this child who would officially become her daughter in a few minutes. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm ready." There was no one to walk Eden down the aisle. Her father was lost to drink and bitterness, and there was no other male relative to do the honor. But as she stood at the back of the church, looking down the aisle to where Gideon waited at the altar with the pastor, she realized she didn't need anyone to give her away. She was giving herself. Freely, deliberately, with full knowledge of what she was choosing. The organ began playing, and Eden started walking. Every eye in the church turned toward her, but she only saw Gideon. He stood tall and steady in his best suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his gray eyes fixed on her with an expression that made her knees weak. Luke and Eli stood beside him as witnesses, both boys scrubbed clean and trying to stand still. Sarah walked ahead of Eden, dropping flower petals with solemn concentration. When Eden reached the altar, Gideon extended his hand. She placed hers in it, and his fingers closed around hers, warm, solid, sure. "Dearly beloved," the pastor began, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony passed in a blur of words and promises. Eden spoke her vows clearly, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. She promised to love and honor, to stand by Gideon in sickness and health, prosperity and hardship, for as long as they both lived. Gideon's voice was deep and firm as he made his own promises. His eyes never left hers, and in them she saw everything they'd been through and everything they were promising to build together. When it came time for rings, Eli stepped forward with a small cushion. On it sat 2 bands, the simple gold ring Gideon had already given Eden, and a new one for Gideon that Eden had purchased with her savings from months of work. "With this ring I thee wed," Eden said, sliding it onto Gideon's finger. "With this ring I thee wed," Gideon echoed, replacing the ring on Eden's hand with the same one, now blessed by the ceremony. "By the power vested in me," the pastor proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Gideon, you may kiss your bride." Gideon pulled Eden close and kissed her gently, sweetly, a kiss that held promise and commitment and love. The church erupted in applause and cheers, and when they finally broke apart, Eden saw that she wasn't the only one crying. Mrs. Hewitt was sobbing into her handkerchief. Several other women were dabbing at their eyes, and even Ephraim Tully looked suspiciously misty. They walked back down the aisle together, husband and wife, followed by 3 children who were grinning from ear to ear. Outside, people threw rice and called out congratulations. Eden laughed and ducked her head against Gideon's shoulder, feeling more joy than she'd thought possible. The celebration afterward was held at the Rhodes homestead, now officially Eden's home too. Tables had been set up outside, laden with food that neighbors had brought. There was music and dancing, children running wild, adults sharing stories and laughter. The sun shone warm and bright, turning everything golden. Eden moved through the crowd accepting congratulations and well wishes. Even some of the women who'd been unkind before seemed genuinely happy for her now. Clara Morrison actually approached to offer stiff congratulations, which Eden accepted with grace. As the afternoon wore on, Eden found herself standing near the garden, watching Gideon play with the children. He was chasing Sarah while Luke and Eli tried to tackle him, all of them laughing and wrestling in the spring grass. He looked lighter than she'd ever seen him, the grief that had weighed him down finally balanced by joy. "You did good, girl." Eden turned to find Deputy Carson standing nearby, hat in hand. She hadn't expected to see him. He'd ridden to bring news of her mother's death, and they'd barely spoken since. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Wouldn't have missed it. I wanted to tell you your father passed 2 weeks ago. Liver finally gave out from all the drinking. He died in his sleep in that falling down shack." He paused. "Thought you should know, though I wasn't sure if you'd care." Eden waited for some emotion to surface. Grief, relief, anger, something. But there was only emptiness where Caleb Marlowe used to be. He'd stopped being her father long before he'd stopped breathing. "Thank you for telling me," she said quietly. "He left some things. Nothing of value, really, but there's a box with some of your mother's belongings. Her Bible, a few letters, some photographs from before things went bad. I brought it with me, figured you might want it." "I would. Thank you." He nodded and melted back into the crowd. Eden stood alone for a moment, processing the news. Both her parents were gone now. The life she'd lived before coming to the Rhodes homestead was completely closed. A chapter ended. But she wasn't sad. She was free. "Eden?" Gideon appeared at her side, slightly out of breath from playing with the children. "Everything all right?" She turned to him, this man who'd saved her and then loved her, this man who'd given her everything she'd never dared hope for. "Everything's perfect. My father died, and I feel nothing but relief." "Is that terrible?" "No." He pulled her close, uncaring of who might see. "That's honest. And after what he did to you, you're entitled to feel however you feel." "I feel free," she whispered, "like the last chain just broke." "Then we'll celebrate that too. Your freedom, your strength, your worth." He kissed her forehead. "Mrs. Rhodes." She smiled up at him. "Say it again." "Mrs. Rhodes." "I don't think I'll ever get tired of hearing that." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, Eden stood with Gideon's arm around her waist and watched their guests begin to depart. The children had finally worn themselves out and were sprawled on blankets near the house, Sarah actually asleep with her head on Eli's shoulder. Luke sat guard over his siblings, looking proud and protective. Mrs. Hewitt was among the last to leave. She hugged Eden tight and whispered, "Your mother is smiling down on you today, dear. I know it. Thank you for everything, for standing up for me when others wouldn't. Should have done it sooner, but I'm glad I finally found my courage." She patted Eden's cheek. "Be happy, child. You've earned it 1,000 times over." Finally, mercifully, everyone was gone. The sun had set completely, and stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Gideon carried Sarah up to bed, while Eden and Luke gathered Eli, who was protesting that he wasn't tired despite yawning every few seconds. After the children were settled, Eden and Gideon stood together on the porch, looking out at the land that was now theirs to build on together. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. The spring breeze carried the scent of flowers and possibility. "I have something for you," Gideon said, pulling a small wooden box from his pocket. "I made it myself. Nothing fancy, but—" Eden opened the box to find a simple sign, beautifully carved with words that made her throat tight with emotion. "The Rhodes Home, Gideon and Eden, Eston, 1884. "I thought we could hang it above the door," he said. "Make it official. This is our home now, built together." "It's perfect." Eden traced the letters of her new name. "Everything is perfect." He took her hand, the one wearing his ring, and kissed her knuckles gently. "Not perfect, but real. And ours. And that's better than perfect." They went inside together, and Gideon hung the sign above the door while Eden watched. When he climbed down from the ladder, she stepped into his arms and let herself be held, let herself feel the full weight of everything that had happened, the pain and the healing, the loss and the finding, the journey from worthless to worthy. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "For what?" "For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. For giving me a choice when everyone else just wanted to use me. For loving me enough to be patient while I learned to love myself." "Eden." He tilted her chin up so she had to look at him. "You did that yourself. I just held the door open. You're the one who walked through it." They stood in the kitchen, the room where she'd first proven her worth through work, where she'd fed a family and made a house into a home, where she'd slowly transformed from hired help into something more. The lamplight cast everything in warm gold, and through the window she could see the stars emerging one by one like promises being kept. This was her life now. Not the life she'd been born into, but the life she'd built. Not given to her by circumstance or cruelty, but chosen through courage and love. She was Eden Rhodes, wife and mother, valued and cherished. She was the woman who'd been traded for flour and had risen to show everyone, including herself, that her worth couldn't be measured in anything so simple as grain or gold. Her worth was infinite, immeasurable, impossible to quantify. She was a woman who'd learned to stand up when the world wanted her to kneel. She was free, and she was home. Gideon led her upstairs to the room that had been his alone, that was now theirs to share. Eden paused in the doorway, suddenly shy despite everything, but Gideon just smiled and pulled her inside, closing the door gently behind them. "No rush," he said softly. "We have all the time in the world now." And they did. All the time in the world to build this life together, to raise these children, to prove every day that love was stronger than circumstance, that choice mattered more than chance, and that worth was something you built yourself, one decision at a time. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying away the last remnants of winter and bringing the promise of spring. In the children's rooms, 3 hearts beat steady in sleep, safe and loved. And in the master bedroom, 2 people who'd found each other against all odds held each other close and dreamed of the future they would build together. Eden's last thought before sleep claimed her was of her mother, looking down from wherever she was and smiling with pride and relief and joy. She'd done it. She'd built the life her mother had wanted for her. She'd survived and thrived and transformed herself from a girl who knelt to a woman who stood tall. She'd learned her worth, and it was magnificent. The story that had begun on a dusty floor in Tully's general store with a girl being traded like grain had ended here, in a warm bed beside a good man, in a house full of love, in a life built on dignity and choice and the unshakable knowledge that she mattered. Eden Marlowe had become Eden Rhodes, and in doing so, she'd become exactly who she was always meant to be. Worth, she'd told Sarah in the snow that winter day, is not given. It's built. And she had built hers into something beautiful.